It's glad I got to get some of that
They're live now.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Oh, good.
Cool.
Lots of warning. I appreciate it.
Hey, at least he let you know the mics were live. At least he let himself know the mics are live.
Yeah, this is a good check to be doing from now on. Usually works.
Also, Faye, I think you're muted.
No.
I haven't heard you.
I
Blast.
am,
Oh,
but
okay.
that's okay. Look what
She's
look who the
IRL
cat
muted.
dragged in.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Ryan.
Good evening.
Good evening.
For
Ken.
everybody else,
Oh, wow, I'm not the only European anymore. Oh, yeah.
you not.
Nice. Just one more and we outnumber them. Wait, no.
Is that European math right there?
Yeah. Benefits of a non-American education system there.
Oh, well, that's a conversation you don't want to have.
Oh.
Then the
It's
US
kind of
have,
true
like,
because we're in
Yeah.
Oregon and Washington, so yeah, we probably don't want to have that conversation. Oh man.
So, yeah.
I'm not hearing
I heard
it
the
yet.
rap song. I see the quick maths. I actually really enjoyed that. That was a good one. I didn't realize it was a comedy at first because I just heard it out of context, and I was like, "Wow, rap's really degraded these days." And then I looked into it. I was like, "Oh, it's a comedian." And then I
What are you
re-listened
talking
to it,
about?
and I was like,
Oh,
"Oh,
I
it's
know what
fun."
you're on about.
I had no idea what you're talking about, Greg.
Oh well, never mind then. It'll just remain a mystery for those of us in the know.
Somebody in chat heard it and appreciated it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
No one
Care to fill
appreciates
us
what I say
in,
in chat.
or-
Don't worry.
That's not true. There's always one person. Nice haircut, by
Always
the way,
one
Greg.
person. There you
Nice
go.
haircut.
Greg,
Do
how,
it. I'm telling you, there's always one person who appreciates you.
Greg, how did you get a
Just one.
haircut in these strange times?
I bought some shears and I did it myself.
Really?
Yeah, I sat in the bathroom and just went, and then I looked and I went, oh fuck, that looks terrible.
Do you
No,
have,
you
do you have
did
a mullet
a,
right
you did
now?
a
How
good job.
What I
Good
thought
job.
would
Alright.
be like 20 minutes of what I thought would be like 20 minutes of stuff ended up being like an hour. I learned that like this part of your head, where like the back of
Oh,
your
I can
skull
see a little
meets
tuft that you missed.
the curvy
yeah.
part of your skull, it's really hard to get like your arms, because your arms are not meant to like go back and then like
Yeah.
around. So like getting the head of the shears where the guard is to that point is very difficult to do. And so
Yeah, I tried to give myself a trim a couple weeks ago, and I was like in the bathroom with like a mirror in one hand and the shears in the other, and like trying to line up a mirror behind my head with a mirror in front of my head, and it's really disorienting. Like it's disorienting enough to try and do stuff.
I couldn't
in
imagine
one
doing it
mirror,
with
but in
scissors.
2 mirrors.
Oh my god.
I had
yeah, 2
I
mirrors
had a
would have
buzzer
helped.
and
You had a buzzer. Yeah. See,
Well,
that's
I don't know
the
if it did
benefit
help,
I
'cause,
have
like-
is I enjoy short hair, so I could just put some like number 3s on and just
Yeah.
go at it. I couldn't imagine trying to style it.
I was just trying to handle the Wolfman thing in the back of my neck. But,
Didn't you get a wife for this very reason, so she could do these things for you?
this was a point of contention between us.
Yeah, I've had this same
She won't
conversation.
help you-
volunteered, but she displayed a lack of confidence that made me nervous. So I ended up doing it myself. Maybe,
I see.
maybe next time.
What is this? I trust you, but only if you trust yourself. Very good.
Yes, exactly. We'll see. Maybe
I'm just
next
letting it grow.
Yeah.
I'm not risking cutting it. I'm
Yeah,
not
I'm
going to
gonna
shave
go-
my head. It's too short, so I'm just going to hopefully go for a man bun in about a month.
Yep.
Go
I'm
for
going.
it.
I'm gonna go properly dwarfy. We can braid our hair next.
Yeah, nice.
You youngins still have a full head of hair. If I just let mine grow, like I get these, like it grows out the sides. I got the mad scientist.
You get the
thing
top
going.
and the
I'm dying-
sides, like the
I mean,
cutouts
you
in
have
the
a
middle.
PhD now, right? Like you should
Yeah.
go for the mad scientist.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
It fits.
Yeah.
So we got topics or what? Are we just?
Oh, we're in
shooting
the
shit?
bullshit section of this show.
Yeah.
Just chit-chatting?
What are you guys
Unbelievable.
doing? And like, I don't
Greg
know.
and I started playing Final Fantasy 14, so we've been cannibalizing our topics for this during that.
That's
Oh,
true. That's true. We've been hanging out
Is
on
that the
Fridays.
MMO one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second MMO one?
Dear.
Yeah. The third one, if you count the like 14 that died.
Oh
There's
yeah.
2 14s.
So 14 originally came out in 2010, and it got like universally panned because it was an awful game. yeah, no, I kind of liked it, but it was an awful game.
Mhm.
But then
The
they
Sean experience. I kind of liked it, but it was an awful game.
I mean, that's Hackmaster too.
Yeah, I know. That's most of the things you talk about.
Yeah, well, the entirety of Hardcore Heroes, you were like, oh, I've just been playing Elder Scrolls 1. Like, I remember you told this story.
Oh
like,
my
going through-
god. Okay,
and
look.
it's like you killed everything, and you had to like you couldn't find the way, and you had to pull like a torch sconce or something like that. But there was no indication of which one you had to.
That was Daggerfall. Daggerfall.
Right,
I
okay,
did not have
yeah.
fun. Daggerfall is my I love it, but it's an awful game moment. Yeah, no, I had one bit in Daggerfall where I had to kill a werewolf in a dungeon, and I spent like an hour and a half going through this dungeon trying to find this werewolf, and I could hear it, but I couldn't get to the section of the dungeon that I was hearing it from. So I was like, okay, clearly there's a secret door in this place. And I spent like another 30 minutes looking around trying to flip everything on every wall so that I could finally find this werewolf. And eventually I just gave up and like reloaded the save and re-accepted the quest to get a different dungeon.
Game design.
If you're like an elf or something, do you get to see secret doors? Or
No. At least I don't think so. 'Cause I was playing an elf.
And this game is from a time like pre-internet where like you don't just get to Google a guide.
Yeah.
I mean, there
sold
was the internet.
strategy. They
but
sold physical strategy guides for this game, and I don't
Right.
think anybody beat that game without a strategy guide.
So the game was intended for you to literally wander around these dungeons, pulling on every object until one of them activates the secret door.
They only do it at like 3 points, but they're all in the main quest, so you have to do those things. One of my favorite bits was there was a point where I had to go underwater to find like a little hole at the base of a wall and crawl underneath it. And that was fine. I found that. The problem was when you go into water in Daggerfall, it reduces your maximum speed. And when you crouch in Daggerfall, it also reduces your maximum speed. And if you crouch underwater in Daggerfall, those two penalties stack additively and can reduce your speed to 0, making it impossible for you to move. So I found the hole in the wall to crawl underneath, but I couldn't move because I couldn't crouch and move in the water at the same time. I had to cheat to get through that. I had to no clip through the wall. I had no other way.
That's amazing.
But
So
yeah,
the point
they
behind 14 was that it died a death of terrible games, and then
Yep.
they remade it to make it better.
So
although
did
they
released
canonically
it?
killed it, which was pretty cool. They like straight up burned the world in fire and then skipped the time ahead 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, so
Then
Final Fantasy
restarted
14 was so shit that they just killed the game. They just ended it and had a canonical, this is the end of the world. It's happening right now. And then they went away, and then they brought back another one.
So it was released and it was just bad
Yep.
and nobody played it. And
I
Yeah,
played
I
the
think they were
first.
down
I
to
played
about-
the first one, like the tutorial at least, and it was so bad that I couldn't make it to the end of the tutorial because the key bindings weren't like you just couldn't move properly and you couldn't navigate through the dialogue. And I thought maybe if I switched the key bindings, but then it was really hard to get into the menu as well, right? And I was just stressing out for about 1 hour to get through the tutorial. I was like, no, okay, never mind. Try this.
Do you remember
Done.
like how everything in that game had a solid like second of latency? Like not
Yes,
just like the
it
movement.
was
did, the
incredibly
menuing did.
slow.
Oh my god.
Everything. It was just, I'm not patient enough for this. I was like, okay, this is not
Yeah.
for me. I can't do it. It looked good. You know, you had
was-
a
it was
nice,
gorgeous.
you know, the story was fine. The writing was good, but I was just sitting there agonizing over
She said
how
from
to
less
use
than
this
an hour
thing.
of tutorial.
I mean, okay.
Beautiful
Not patient
tutorial
enough.
writing. They really told me how to press the X button.
Well, I do a little bit of story. You have to cut people some slack. Okay, somebody did something right.
I'll send you like one of the opening cutscenes, Greg, because it's actually like that game was gorgeous back in 2010. It was groundbreaking for an MMO in terms of
You
how
told
it
me
looked.
you thought it looked better than 13, which is like one of the few things 13 has going for it is that it tried to look pretty.
Yeah, it was a really good looking game. It didn't run on anybody's PCs well because it was too good looking, but it was good looking.
was it PC only or did they have a console
I don't-
release as well?
There
Did
is a
consoles
console
have
release
MMOs
now.
before like recently? Like I can't remember
No.
people playing MMOs on console
But
until
2010 would have been PS4 era, right?
I think-
14 was on the
no,
PS3
PS3.
originally.
PS3.
Yeah.
I think.
14 was definitely console made for Realm Reborn. I don't remember if it was for 1.0.
PS3 had internet access, or like you could connect to the internet to download updates and stuff. but
PS2 did too. Actually.
there wasn't really MMO content.
Consoles had been online for ages, but like
Yeah.
I get the
And,
fact
like,
that Final Fantasy like
When-
11 was on an old PlayStation. It might have even been on the PlayStation 1.
Yeah,
But like
and-
nobody played it on that.
and
Like
there
the
weren't
player
real-
base of that would have been like 7 kids in their basement.
Yeah.
MMOs were played on a PC until
And there weren't real MMOs for the like. I can remember when the first Dark Souls came out. It was like super groundbreaking that they had like these ghosts of other players wandering around your world.
Mhm.
Like, so they were like connecting to the internet to like get
Wasn't
some
there-
of their game data to make little like avatars appear, but you couldn't really interact with them.
Wasn't there an MMO on the Dreamcast? Like, not Final Fantasy, but the Sega version of Final Fantasy.
There was, I can't remember if it was PS1 or PS2, but Phantasy Star Online was really popular.
Yeah, that's it. Fantasy Star Online. I wasn't on the Dreamcast.
I thought it was PS2 or PS1.
Maybe not. But yeah, that was like the first MMO on console that I remember.
Was it
Yeah,
Fantasy with a
I
PH?
can't think of anything before that, and
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
popular. And I think 11 actually did have a decent console player base.
of 7.
Yeah, it was on the Dreamcast. On the GameCube. Fucking badass. Those old Fantasy Star games like Fantasy Star 4 and Fantasy Star 5 are pretty good actually.
Mhm.
Cool. I've never even heard of that franchise, so that's cool.
Oh really? It's very much
Yeah.
like Final Fantasy, you know.
Is it?
Even
I
the-
mean,
even
there's a
today.
lot of games that are very much like Final Fantasy, right? It's kind of the standard bearer of a genre.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So much like Final Fantasy, they had to change the F to a PH.
Yeah.
To be similar to, but legally distinct from.
When was the first Final Fantasy released? Let's see. Which one's
For our
first?
time.
That would have been 1980s.
NES, 80 something.
Yeah. First Fantasy Star was 87.
Nobody cares
First
about
Final Fantasy
Star,
was
Nick.
87.
Same year, alright.
Really?
That happens a lot, right? There's a ton of Japanese RPGs that all came out in the same 80s, right?
Yeah.
Like the consoles kind of
Final
NPCs.
Fantasy, sorry. 2 days earlier it came out. Final Fantasy.
Ooh.
Yeah, they're all kind of right around the window. Like Dragon Quest, I think, came out a year before Final Fantasy.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
the Dragon
Sorry,
Quests, the Tenseis, the what's the one Dragon Slayer Dragon Slayer? Is that the series? They all kind of came out in the same boom period.
I really like
Honestly,
Dragon Quest 1.
the Dragon Slayer series is really cool if you can get to some of the like older editions of it, the ones that came out in like 89, 90. Like
Mhm.
Lord Monarch, if you can ever find a way to like get it to run on your PC, is amazing. Lord Monarch is really funny.
Never even heard of it.
It's from the Falcom like games. It's like the 7th entry in the Dragon Slayer series, all of which are pretty interesting. The Dragon Slayer series is just like it's all RPGs. It's all like different styles of the RPG. It started with Dragon Slayer, and it started with Dragon Slayer 2, which I think is called Xanadu, and like they're like your third person, wander around a dungeon, consume meals, right? Consume rations, get loot. Like they're like the precursor of that kind of genre, kind of. And then like they moved on to like side scrollers and to other things. And Lord Monarch is like your 4X like precursor. It's really cool, and I think the gameplay holds up pretty well. One of my friends has an old like Japanese computer essentially set up on Linux. It's the Nippon Entertainment Computer 90 something, 98 or whatever, I don't know. And on that, in Japanese, he can run the games like Lord Monarch and some of the old like Falcom games. They're really sweet. It's neat.
nostalgic.
I wish some of those you could like actually play more easily, because I think that there's like, I wouldn't play them all day every day, but definitely getting a chance to mess around with the origins of some of the games that we play now is kind of cool.
We played the old Fantasy Star ones back in the day on, I think they were like a SNES emulator or something like that. Stuff like that seems to be okay.
Cool.
It's hard to go back and play NES games though.
Yeah.
Depends
Even
on
if you
the
enjoyed
NES
them.
game.
Yeah, but even if you enjoyed it a lot as a kid or whenever you were playing it to begin with, NES games are hard to go back to
I will stand for the original Castlevania. That game holds up well today. I played that very recently.
It's a great platformer, but it is a difficult game. And
oh, it's hard, but it's very tightly designed and really well put together, more so than most NES games.
Which one is the original Castlevania? I've got one on my phone that I haven't got around to starting yet.
The original Castlevania, you play as, I think, Simon.
I've got Symphony of the Night is the one I've got on my phone.
No, that's
Symphony of the Night
PlayStation
is
1.
not
That's
the
pretty
first
sweet.
one,
Yeah.
but it is considered kind of like the standard bearer of the series.
Yeah,
It might be the best one.
The original Castlevania was back when it was kind of a linear action platformer. Symphony of the Night was when they went into that sort of exploratory mode of
Super
there's a big-
Metroid kind of thing.
Yeah. It's I think where the term Metroidvania really came from.
Symphony of the Night is hella good, though.
Yeah.
It's all right.
They
yeah.
did some really cool things with sprites. They didn't do it 3D. They just had like 10,000 sprites worth of animations, so the character movements are all really slick and really cool.
Yeah, it seems to run pretty well on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I should give it a go. But I absolutely loved Super Metroid when I went through that on an emulator. That was such a great game.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah, most NES games do not hold up too well. I can
No.
agree with that.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever played the Zelda on the NES?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that one. Okay, that one actually does hold up pretty well too.
It
Yeah, the
does.
first one holds up well, I think.
I'll give that a go one day.
I
I
don't know
played
about a
Secret
Link
of
to the Past.
Mana. That's also pretty good. That's a good one to play. But fuck, that game is hard. Like, if you don't know when to level and what to use and what to do, it can be really frustrating. Like, it's very difficult. It's one of the games where you're better off having a guide. It's like, oh, but like, yeah, I just want to try out if I can figure it out myself. No, fuck that. Way too hard. Like, way too hard. I'm still at the beginning, and it's difficult sometimes.
When do you decide on when to use a guide and when not? Because like I have resisted using guides often. It just is like a natural like, no, ew, icky, a guide. And then I oftentimes have a lot more fun when I'm like, fuck it, let me Google this. Like I don't know when to use a guide and when not.
I don't have a hard rule for it. Like there are games where I feel like I can beat this game and then I'll try to avoid using a guide. And then there are some games where I just give up very quickly and pull out a guide. And then sometimes I make a mistake. Like I tried to beat Daggerfall without a guide for a very long time, and that was a big error on my part.
Why was it so hard? Like just because you were leveling inefficiently, or?
I think I had a bad build too. That probably didn't help. I struggled a lot toward the end of the game. But also,
direction I think is important in older RPGs like Daggerfall.
You just don't know where to go. You mean?
Yeah, they're
that
not
wasn't
having a
so
direction
bad.
can be a problem.
That wasn't so bad. Daggerfall actually works pretty well in this regard. Although you do have to be careful, because if you ever say no to a quest, you can't get it back again, right? So if you're offered a main quest, like an important quest, and you say no, it's gone forever. GG.
Well, and you just can't finish the game.
Yeah. So don't decline a quest if it sounds important. But
That's pretty funny.
for the most part,
Even
like,
main storylines?
Yep.
Yeah, that's old school gaming right there.
Yeah.
They must have put that
Yeah.
in on purpose. Like there's no way they've like made a mistake there and not realized that somebody could do that.
Yeah,
It's a holdover from the way they made text-based adventures, right? If you played Zork, you could just like not pick up the right item, and then you've put yourself in a hard lost state.
Yep.
Right? They're the old RPGs are built in the same way story-wise, or like I guess game design-wise, as those text adventures were, which were made for you to like replay, to like figure out the exact line through of things you need and suck away all your hours, right?
Is that intentional or is it just laziness?
I think it was intentional for
Yeah.
the good games in the series, and then I guess the bad like shit jobs were probably just unintentional laziness.
Yeah.
Yep.
The crummy part is it doesn't end the game for you or like warn you that the game is unbeatable.
Well, so
it's just
Daggerfall
like lets you flail around for hours before you realize that you're missing a main quest
Yeah.
or an important
That
item.
is
Or...
so annoying.
Well, so the thing about Daggerfall is that it was that open world Elder Scrolls experience, right? And it was the first one to really go into that, right? Like Daggerfall added vampirism. It added buying houses. You could buy a boat in that. It was meant to be the open sandbox RPG experience back.
I love
before
how the
that
boat
was-
is important. That's good. You could buy a boat.
You could own a ship, and it functioned as a house, but it could also be used to travel. So it was strictly better than a house.
You owned a houseboat.
Yeah, yeah.
Sean still feels very strongly about it to this day.
Like, I guess what I'm getting at is like, I get why they wouldn't hard lock your game, because it was a sandbox game, so you could play Daggerfall and never do the main quest, and you would still be
But like
doing a lot of
Zork,
content.
you could just Zork yourself and like miss out on the the important key to open the door.
Yep.
Did Greg
Well, it was
freeze or
also-
no? He's just okay.
No, I'm good.
All right.
In old console games, you also had the problem of like limited save space, right? So you have one space, maybe you have two space. If you share with your brother or sister, you might only have one. So you might be stuck in a situation where you can't go back. I had it in one game where it was Secret of Evermore, and you are in an arena and you're fighting one dude, and he is, I think, weak to spears, and that's all he's weak to. So you get auto-saved into this arena, what I didn't know, obviously. And I didn't have my spear trained, so I only had a sword. And this guy is crushing you if you don't have that. So I had to start the entire game over because I hadn't trained that one. And it was I was sitting there for hours trying that. And it was just too hard, and I just couldn't do it. And I had the same problem at some point with Final Fantasy X, I think it was, which was later, obviously.
Really?
There's one point, is the goddamn desert with the lightning. I don't know what this place is called, I haven't played this game in ages, but it's a desert, right? And there's a mini game where you can hop to like,
It's a lightning.
or whatever that is, right? And there's one boss there, it's like a, I can't remember what it is, but this boss happens, like there's a save point and then there's the boss, you know? And you can't turn around. You're kind of locked in that area and you can't make it out of there. So I magically managed to be under-leveled for this, and I was just stuck there.
Was this the international version of the game?
Probably?
Or
I don't
was it
think-
the European? You're from Europe. It was the European version.
It would be the European version
So
because I think
there's
the consoles had all and the other thing, right?
There's a that wouldn't have happened to Americans who played the game.
That wouldn't
because
happen if you were an American, Faye. We know how to deal with that shit. We got deserts and lightning.
The only boss that I'm trying to like give some knowledge here about.
I'm sorry.
different
I'm
games,
sorry,
so
Greg.
shut up.
Waiting with
Let me ask
The only boss that's going to lock you like that in the area you're talking about without the ability to go backwards is the Dark Aeon, and I think it's Shiva in that area. But the Dark Aeons do have ability to lock you like that. In the American version, they took that out. I guess they decided Americans were too much of a bitch and couldn't handle it. So that wasn't there until the international version of the game came out as a HD remake.
So you know about this specific thing that she's meant talking about?
Yeah.
You really are a Final Fantasy expert, Greg.
Dude, I can't even remember what that looked like. I just remember this because it was so
my
frustrating.
favorite
you know?
game of all time. It's one of the only games I've ever truly 100%ed.
Really? See, I played 7, 8, and 9 all the way through, and then never finished 10. I just didn't get into it as much.
That's fine. I understand. 10 was the first Final Fantasy game I ever played. It came out when I was like 11 or 12, and it was like, so like I have a fair bit of rose-tinted glasses looking at it, right? But I do think it holds up better than its reputation with some of the detractors. I think a lot of people have good reasons why they dislike it, but then there's a section of people who just hate it because they've seen other people hate on it, and I think that they don't really without playing it, I don't think they really understand what works about it, because there are a lot of things that work well in it.
I just remember not liking the because I really liked the card games in 7 and 8 and 9, I think. Or was it just 8 and 9 that had the card
8 and
games?
9.
But then
Card
the
games.
underwater volleyball thing in 10 just didn't do anything for me.
Oh my god, I loved Blitzball.
Oh
Blitzball
I was
gang!
like, oh my god. I love that shit. I don't know why. I don't even play, I don't play soccer on console. I don't play basketball. I don't care about this shit. And then Blitzball came up, and I was like, fuck, this is great. I want the best people in my fucking team. You know, it was amazing. I love that. I don't know where that came from. I am not even remotely interested in these kinds of games, but I love Blitzball. I don't know.
I feel similar to Nick. I found the Blitzball very difficult. But I loved the grid system that they had for the magic. I thought that was a really fun way to develop your skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did it work?
The spheral board or whatever it was.
Yeah, the sphere board.
Well, if you had the international version of the game, then you had a wide open grid that you could take your characters most anywhere.
yeah. See,
There
I
was
didn't
some,
like this either.
blocks. If you played the American version of the game, you got a streamlined version of it with very little openings. Your characters had to go down certain paths.
No,
I believe
remember
we
being
had two.
open.
You could choose between either. Like you had to decide in the beginning which board you wanted.
Yeah.
Like, you
Okay.
could have
So
the open. or
I
you
don't
could have
know
the
why
closed.
anyone would not choose the expert grid, but yes, you had a choice. We did not in our release. Not until the HD remake when they gave us the European version.
You're like a wealth of knowledge about Final Fantasy games. Does anyone else have any
I
obscure
played every
questions for
single
Greg?
one of the numbered. Look, like 3 years ago or 5 years ago, or whenever we started Hardcore Heroes, I started playing every single Final Fantasy game on my channel. I'm now done with it, right? I've played
done.
all of the numbered series, like
All right, Greg.
recently on stream, and like 10 is my favorite game of all time. I've 100%ed it multiple times.
If I was going to go
Where-
back and play one of the old ones, which one would I play? Like one of the
Fantasy Tactics.
So are you okay, so if we're including tactics as part of the main series, then that's probably a good you're a tactical kind of gamer, right? And you would
Yeah.
probably enjoy the tactics portion of it. And Final Fantasy Tactics is just a great game. I consider it a spin-off. It's not part of the
I
main
consider
numbered
it a
series,
spin-off,
but of the spin-offs, I think it's the best one by a mile. I even like the Tactics Advance that came out on the Game Boy Advance.
I had that when I was a kid. I loved that.
Yeah,
that
it was
great.
fun. It was a good one. I think Final Fantasy Tactics, like the original on the PlayStation, was much better, but the Game Boy Advance one was good too. So yeah, play that. It's good.
Nick, if you're looking to do that, I can help you out. You can hack the PS1 version of Final Fantasy Tactics and put in the better translation from the PSP version, but still play the PS1 version of the game.
Whoa,
I mean-
tell me how to do this, buddy.
I will. Yeah, I will hook you
Send
up
me
later.
instructions, please. I need
Neal,
this.
are you committing to finishing that game? Because I'll probably just watch you play it
Oh
instead.
fuck yeah, it's so good. It's
Dude, you
so
have
good.
to
It's worth
catch up.
playing.
It's
You might
already
need to
like
restart.
30 hours in.
No, I don't know if it would break.
I'll catch up on the buds. Yeah,
That's
I'll catch up
fine.
on the buds.
Okay.
I will
Yeah,
need this
you can-
for the future one day.
Okay. Yeah,
I will
no,
play this
I
game
did it,
many
and it was the
times.
best decision I ever made. Because I tried doing the PSP version, and like the slowdown on attacks whenever somebody did a special ability just killed me. I also didn't like the cutscenes on the PSP version, but then I found out I could put the better translation on the PS1, and I got the best of both worlds.
So what? They made the translations worse over time.
No,
No,
the
better.
translation is better later because on the PS1 it was like a very rough literal translation from Japanese.
But here's the question: does it still go little money?
That is my favorite part of the game.
I don't think
That's
so.
part of the game.
I
Yeah,
don't
see,
think so.
no, then it's a shit translation.
That
Get rid of it.
Wait, so I don't understand that. You telling Neal how to get the bad translation back?
No, the
No, no,
good
no, no.
translation on the good version.
Yeah.
No, he means the bad
I
translation.
see.
It doesn't go little money.
I see what you mean. So
Now I'm confused. Is the good translation the cheesy literal one, or is it the
No, the good. All right, it's a good meme, Greg, but the good translation is the better PSP version.
Okay.
Yeah.
but
It's
the,
just
the
a-
rest of the so you want to play the original version of the game, but with the PSP translation.
Yes.
I guess you could play the PSP version too. More lines added a new class and fixed a couple of things here and there. I haven't played through it before. I don't know.
It's-
You're talking about the slow attack stuff.
Yeah, if somebody does a special ability or like a magic spell or something, it drops the frame rate to like 10, and the game time actually slows down. So if somebody does a special attack, it takes like 2 to 3 times as long as it does in the PS1 version of the game.
That sounds like an unintentional bug.
Yeah, you could patch it on like the original PSP, but the patch only worked on certain versions of the PSP. So
Oh my god.
yeah, so yeah,
Lovely.
that one ruined it for me.
But since Greg brought it up, Final Fantasy, totally legit game to have a guide for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
my
used to have all the game. I used to always buy the guide with the game.
Yes,
And then you
exactly.
pay
That's what I used to do as well. And I used to play with my sister, and one would hold the book and the other person was playing. You know, that's how we played. That's how we. And
Yeah.
I've, like, you know, that's how it went. That's how the game was for me. So I never regretted, you know, like
No, the
not
game was
playing
still
with
hard
the
though.
guide
Like,
through that.
I barely finished them anyway. Like I remember in Final Fantasy VII, like the last boss, I must have spent like a week. Like when you were a kid and you could just, well, maybe you guys still can, but just play the same thing over and over and over and again for hours and hours and hours. I must have just ran that last boss in Final Fantasy VII about 500 times.
The funny thing about that game is I was so hell-bent on getting every little thing that I could. The Sephiroth boss didn't bother me at all. I wiped the floor with him.
Yeah. See, I didn't build efficiently at all.
Yeah, I spent like the same amount of time you did trying to beat Sephiroth, trying to beat Ruby and Emerald Weapon.
I never even beat them. I built Ultimate Weapon. Was that the one?
Yeah,
That was the one where
Ultimate Weapon.
you had to cast Resurrection before somebody was even dead. Because it would then like nuke your whole team, and if you didn't have it already queued up, they'd just kill you before. Man, and I only knew that because of the guide. That's a fucking joke. How hard that was.
The weapons were hard as hell, and I the first time I played, I eventually gave up, and I was like, no, I'm gonna go win the game now, and I had to come back to it like when I was older. And
yeah, it used to scare me as well. Like the one under the water. Which one was that?
Emerald, yeah.
It used to freak me out even going down there.
yeah.
Horrible.
When I was a kid, I would have like tremors. I'm like, no, we gotta stay away from it. We're gonna sneak around to the edge of the water.
Exactly. How old was I when that came out?
For tactics, you don't need a guide for tactics, but I do recommend rotating your save slots because you could soft lock yourself if you're not careful.
I remember playing the one on the Game Boy Advance, and I didn't have a guide for that. And it was only when I came back to play it when I was older, and I started like looking up like how the classes actually worked and stuff like that, that I realized there was just far more to it than I ever realized. Probably another game where I just got stuck because my guys are too shit. Cool stuff though. Final Fantasy back in the day. That was the only reason to have a PlayStation, if you ask me, over a Nintendo 64. Probably a controversial comment, but
yeah.
7, 8, and 9 was so good.
The 64 was good as hell, though.
Right? Yeah, exactly. The PlayStation 1.
You're comparing like two classic consoles, right?
True.
The games on those were out of control.
And like, PlayStation 1 was a fantastic console. Like, there were a lot of good games on the PS1.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 12 is easy to get stuck in. I disagree. The game will play itself for you, Kelds.
It's all right for you, professional Final Fantasy consultant. To say that.
So, Greg, do you know where every Cid is in every game?
Oh man,
I can tell you no because he hasn't found Cid in Final Fantasy 14.
14 doesn't count. It's an MMO. I have found every Cid in every game, but if you like gave me a quiz right now, where is each and every one of them? I'm not sure I could tell you.
Remind me what Cid is again. It rings a bell. But...
Cid is a reoccurring character in the Final Fantasy series. He's kind of different in every game. Sometimes he's a dwarf. Sometimes he's a hot chick.
Sometimes he's an old man.
For the most part, Cid is your like airship guy.
Oh yeah, that's why I remember.
He either owns the airships, or he repairs the airships, or he makes the airships, or his daughter works on your car and makes it fly.
Or he's just a really badass fighter. He's always some sort of exceptional character, and I don't think there's any correlation between them other than someone's like, let's just put a guy named Cid in every fucking game.
Yep.
He's usually a secret character. I think in 7 he's like a main character that you need to get, but a lot of them he's like a secret character that you need to like go out and find.
Defined secret. He's usually a part of the like main quest. You'll run into him. Except for in Final Fantasy 1, where he's a double ultra secret character because he wasn't actually in the game, and then when they remade it for like later consoles, they added him back in, or they added him to Final Fantasy 1 because he was in all the other ones.
So what's your most interesting Final Fantasy fact, Greg? Let's get some trivia on the go here.
Final Fantasy facts?
Most interesting Final Fantasy fact: the person who is responsible for the worst games and stories ever made is the person who wrote one of the best games ever made. It's Final Fantasy VII. And Nomura is, in my opinion, a horrifically bad writer, but his magnum opus Final Fantasy VII is truly great. And so he's the same one who I don't trust at all as the main guy in control of Square Enix, but is also responsible for one of the best games I've ever played. So
which of the games did he write that was so bad?
he had his
7
hand.
was great.
He's had his hand in almost every game that they've made for a long time. He became kind of head writer for 7, and he considers 8 like his style. He started as a graphical artist. He made all the character designs, right? And he's kind of the one who popularized the style that you associate with Final Fantasy, right? The kind of like fantasy punk main character style, zippers and belts, right?
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, shout outs to Royal Red. He got there before I did. But he made the monster designs too, which are iconic in like Final Fantasy VI. And so a lot of the things that you associate with Final Fantasy, part of the like
Is he responsible for chocobos?
aesthetic. No, Chocobo's been around before him. But he's kind of the design artist, and he's incredibly gifted at it. But he also dabbles in writing, and he wrote dialogue, and he wrote other things in parts of games. But 7 and 8 were his, like, they just handed him the reins. And 7 is a masterpiece, and 8 is.
Is that how we got Vincent?
That's how you got Vincent. Yeah, that's his character.
Edgy.
A lot of the characters in 7 and 8 are characters that were he designed for Final Fantasy VI, but were cut from the game. So there's a lot of characters he brought forward into those games.
Has too many zippers. Like, just you wait. One day I'll be in charge and we'll bring it back.
He wrote a hell of a game in Final Fantasy VII, but like since then, the more he's written, the less I like it.
What was the name? This is an easy question. In Final Fantasy VIII, when you're at the school, you've got like a rival guy that you're rivals with. What was his name again?
Cypher.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, Cypher. What a great game that was. I like the bit where, can't remember what you're doing, but you're trying to run away with that chick who you're kind of in love with, but your guy won't admit. And then somehow you end up on like a spaceship with just the two of you. And there's like aliens everywhere.
That's because Renoa was a sorceress, right? She
got locked up for being too powerful or something like that.
Well, and so the ancient sorceress Ultimisia was attempting to reincarnate, right? And so, but to do that, she shared her powers, right, with Renoa. And so the like hidden city that was fighting the sorceresses essentially shot her up in space to try to put her up there where the original sorceress was, and you had to go save her.
And then there's like a big romantic scene where he like confesses that he loves her on the alien ship.
The funny thing is they kiss, but I don't think he ever says that, right? Like they just play the song.
How do you can you actually see that? Because I couldn't see anything in that goddamn game.
Through the
that's true, because the graphics were terrible.
Yes, and I don't mean the old graphics either. I could play 4 or something perfectly fine, 0 complaints, all good. But 8 was a pain.
I made a mistake in my story. Space wasn't to entrap her; they were gonna try to cure her. That's right.
Oh, okay.
Really?
Well.
But I mean, what is the cure other than a trap when you take her to a space station? Come on.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Good games.
Well, Ryan, you got
pictures of
who's
it.
gone?
Sorry.
He just left. Yeah.
He's left. He's had enough of this. This is my Final Fantasy.
He gets
like, oh,
tired of
fuck
us
Final Fantasy.
talking about old games.
It's fine. We can switch topics, but I just want to say that I think Final Fantasy IX is a lovely game. It's also a good game to start. Like, if you're not interested in tactics, 9 is okay.
I meant more like the 2D ones. Like 1 to 6.
The old ones, 4, probably 4.
6.
9 is technically a 2D game. Just saying.
Okay.
I often tell people who want to start the series and are looking to get into the older games to start with 9 because it is more modern than a lot of the old ones. It's hard for me to say start with 6 to someone who hasn't played a lot of older RPGs because it's old. at this point. Like, it hasn't aged as well as people say. Like, the story is good, but the gameplay is lacking in a lot of the things that you expect from games nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And so if that's something that is not going to appeal to you, it's really hard for me to say play 6, play 4, play 5, because you're gonna get an experience that's not necessarily that good. 9 is the homage to old school Final Fantasy before they took the full plunge into what it is now.
I've played 9 now. I've finished
It's
that.
the throwback to the old style, and so it has a little bit more modern sensibility to it. Still feels old. It's getting older too, but it's the one that I often recommend. I think Faye is on point. If you're looking to get into the series, 9 is a great starting point.
Yeah, I'd also say if you're looking for something that's very approachable, most of the spin-off games are more approachable than the mainline games.
I think we
What
have to have a
about-
talk about what represents a spin-off game, for sure.
Something that's
What
not
about,
in the numbered games.
Chrono Trigger. That's made by Square Enix as well. I always see that hailed as like one of the best games ever.
It was not made by Square Enix.
It's made by Squaresoft.
Squaresoft. Yes.
Oh.
Very much.
Ooh, rookie mistake.
Wait,
Yeah,
Square
Chrono Trigger's
Enix
pretty legit.
is the company that grew out of Squaresoft,
Yeah.
and it has a reputation for being inferior. A lot of the games that people find divisive and less good were made by Enix. And
It's
Square
the Blizzard
Enix.
Activision of Squaresoft.
So Chrono Trigger was made by the good ones.
Square-
Good
Soft.
one. Yeah.
So is that a good game then? 'Cause I remember
It's-
playing that a little bit back in the day and liking it.
It's good. I get about halfway, maybe 2/3 of the way through, and then it sort of, I don't get very far past that. I don't know if I just lose interest or the storyline gets hard to follow, or I'm not sure where to go next, but I get about 2/3 through before I usually drop it. But it's good. Writing's good, character's good, music is fantastic. Lots of weird time
I-
travel.
Does your expertise not extend to Chrono Trigger, Greg?
I've played Chrono Trigger. I like it a lot. I played it. It came, so when I played Final Fantasy X the first time, I went, wow, this is great. I love it. I'm a new fan. What is this Final Fantasy thing? And I Googled it and I went, holy shit, there's 10 more of these, or there's 9 more of these. I guess the box wasn't lying to me. And so I found a site that said the best one of all time is 7. And so my brother and I bought that, and I like Hollywood Video, and it came in this like big box set of game discs, and included on the disc was Chrono Trigger. And I was the elitist, like, oh well, that's clearly just a shitty fucking game. Like, why would they include the throw-in game with the good game? So I didn't play it. My brother did. My brother was like, Greg, this is a baller ass game. It's like, okay, I'll give it a try, and it was good. It's legitimately like a top tier RPG. It's really, really good.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's move on to new topics. Ryan, do you have one for us?
I don't know. No, I did not do my homework. And I haven't been paying
damn it,
attention
Ryan.
because I haven't played Final Fantasy since Final Fantasy VII, and even then I was a quitter and I didn't finish most of them.
Yeah.
So I've been spacing out and refilling beverages.
Well, that's why I'm trying to hit you up for a topic. I've noticed your absence.
Okay. We had Greg and Faye in one call. I figured someone would be in charge with the list of
Why
topics.
would I be in charge? You
didn't
don't
do my
even know
homework.
me. Don't put that pressure on.
I think Greg and I did. What was the thing that we were going to bring to this, Greg?
Oh, you wanted me to talk about the difference between playing online and playing in person, but I think that time has long passed.
But
So
because you aren't allowed to play in person anymore.
would you
Essentially.
We were ahead of our time.
would you like me to dip into my list of potential?
I knew there was a list.
Just fishing for it.
All
Yeah, go on.
So something that has been on my mind recently is the concept of bringing more depth to combat. I find that there are a lot of people who talk about wanting more out of their combat, and they're finding modern games lacking, but I think also when they dip their toes into older systems, it becomes too much for them. And so I wanted to talk to you guys, who are all very experienced Dungeons and Dragons players, and what you like. We'll just start with, what do you expect from a combat, right? And what does, I think, in order to figure out how we add depth to it, right? What does combat look like in your idealized version? What would be a good deep combat situation for you be?
One comparison I'll make right off the bat is between, contrast is between theater of the mind versus grid-based combat. Mm-hmm. And I feel like doing a more theater of the mind based combat, even if you're using the same rule set, even if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, locking yourself to a grid, in my experience, tends to limit combat options to, like, I move my character here to this very defined spot, and I use my attack action, and like that's all you come up with to do. Whereas if there's no grid, you're much freer to be able to interact with other objects, or be flexible with like how close your character is to other characters and what your options are. Anyone else have similar or different experiences there?
I like both of them. I agree that is one of the downsides to doing grids, is that people will look at the grid and think in terms of the grid. But the benefit of the grid is it lets you run bigger, more complex combats, right? And you can't do them as well if you're just trying to keep everything in your head. Like, there's only so much people can keep in their head at any one time. So many factors you can consider. You can have more enemies and more environmental obstacles if you run the game with an actual battle
I disagree map. I mean, in terms of like a detailed battle, maybe, but like if you're willing to like not care too, like original versions of D&D, I mean, I guess there's like the chainmail history, but then they kind of moved away from that to a more theater of the mind style, and they basically broke it down to like you're in the melee or you're out of the melee. And if you're in the melee, like here's all the rules associated with that, and you can just have like 100 people.
So are you saying your idealized combat would be a theater of the mind kind of improvisation of it?
I don't even know. I wouldn't say that. I was just saying that that grid doesn't necessarily allow for larger combats.
I think an ideal combat needs to be tense, right? It needs to be like the best combats are always the ones that come down to the wire. You're on the edge of your seat. It does get boring if I've noticed in my games when you've got like the low level fighter with chainmail versus like a high AC monster. That it's just like, okay, I attack, I miss. Okay, it attacks, they miss, and then you're like rolling just back and forth, just waiting for somebody to get a hit to actually do some damage. So that's kind of boring.
I think that's why 5e introduced the bounded accuracy. So like even at level 1, you're hitting about the same as you would at 20.
But I think
really
like
likes to miss.
Playing a wizard in 2e, I really like, because it's always seems super tense, but you've actually got some sort of strategic actions as well. Whereas when you play like fighter, maybe you don't always have the strategic actions unless you're doing like the theater of mind, like Ryan's talking about, where maybe then you can sort of like come up with some sort of special way you're attacking or like something you're doing.
I almost feel like the wizards, it gets more strategy when there is a grid. Like it becomes more strategic where you place your spells, and at least it's clear what the effects will be, so you can strategize.
Yeah,
whereas
I mean,
theater of the mind, you're kind of leaving it up to your DM to interpret how many.
Yeah, you got to argue with them about how many you can
necessarily create a more in-depth combat feel, because we've been down that path before in Dungeons and Dragons specifically, but in tabletop RPGs in general, right? The really in-depth, granular combat system with lots and lots of options and different rules and cross-checking tables for equipment and what they do has been tried and largely discarded. Most people
I agree with you. I don't think like loads of options is great, but there needs to be like maybe some. Like just even in 2e, like just being able to do like, oh, will I shield bash for an extra attack but lose my AC on my shield, or will I do like a knockdown attack? Like things like that, just like a few options like sort of adds more interest.
The trouble is all of those were balanced around being worse than just making an attack.
That is the problem. Yeah, that is the problem. But to go back to your point about theater of mind and wizards, you know, like, and Sean, and even the whole through Hardcore Heroes, we basically played theater of the mind. And it was a common thing for us to say, well, sorry, how many spiders are there? And Neal would say, maybe like 3, 4, 5. You don't know. You're in the middle of the fight. It's hard to tell. Which I think I always found that to be quite legit.
Mm-hmm. But then, like, if you're throwing down your fireball, you don't know how many spiders you're going to be able to catch. You kind of just have to be like, I want to get as many as I can. And
that's what would happen, though. Like, it'd say, how many can I hit with this? And Neal would be like, okay, maybe you can hit 4 or 5.
Does a certain element of uncertainty enhance that feel for you guys? Because if I were trying to create a realistic system, some kind of like fog of war might be something that I would consider, right? If you're in the pitch of battle, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to have the kind of bird's eye view that you as a player do, right, at the table. So does having that uncertainty make you feel more engaged and have more depth in the combat, or is that something that maybe would frustrate you as a player of a game at the table?
No, I think it's more. I feel more engaged with it. Like I remember again at Hardcore Heroes, it was when we were walking through the forest down the Crystal Run, going to try and find what happened to those dwarves, and we got ambushed by lizard men in the forest or whatever. And Neal was like, "Okay, there's like 6 of them around you, but there's like more in the trees." And if it seemed like a top-down map and I could see all the lizard men, I'd probably not be scared. But because it was just like, well, we're in a forest, there's probably fucking hundreds of them here. Like, there could just be loads. We could just be dead here. I don't know. Like, I feel like not having the map makes it more tense because you don't properly know like what you're against.
Yeah, when I run games, my usual approach, I'll give people numbers for things that are directly in front of them. But yeah, like if you have things that are off in the trees, probably shooting at you with bows, like, yeah, there's a number out there. Like, they're not all in full view. A lot of them are ducking behind cover. A lot of them are obscured from your view. You don't have an exact count. But I think that we're kind of going... When a lot of people say they want more in-depth combats, they often look to the system to try and patch it up. And that's probably a misguided way to do it. Because if you define all your combats around 2 sides running into each other and whacking each other until one side has become the greater metal on meat beater, then you're only ever going to have mosh pits for combats.
You do have a way with words, Sean.
You made that sound really good to me. I want to beat metal. I want to mosh pit. Can I play this game?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, like, if you really want to put more depth into your combat, you should think like, why are these people going to fight, and like what sort of objectives do they have in mind, right? If they're trying to fight because they're fighting over treasure, put that treasure at risk by virtue of the combat. Like that's the fucking the one that, what's that thing that comes up all the time, the Ming vase.
The Ming vase, yeah.
Yeah. And then you can do similar things, like you're escorting somebody. If you're doing an escort mission, it's not just okay, and then you do a combat to protect them. It's they're in danger while you're in that combat, and you actively protect them during this escort mission. And I think that's where you get more depth from combat, is ask, why are people fighting, and how can I add a layer of like, how do I give people an intention beyond just whack the other thing until it dies in combat? And that's where I would go.
One of the things that I see a lot when people are asking for that, that's great advice for a DM. And I think that makes very interesting encounter design. But once the encounter has started, and it devolves down to it's time to fight for whatever reason, I think that a lot of people, when they're asking for an in-depth combat, are looking for options, like what Nick was bringing up. He says, I find it boring when I swing my sword and they swing their sword and I swing my sword and they swing their sword. He wants some kind of option to make things feel more engaging. And so beyond the engaging encounter design, which I think is very important for DMs, I think thinking about what your monsters are doing is great. Bring a lot to your world. I think that I'm very interested in how do we make the actual, now it's time for us to put some metal on some meat. How do we make the metal on meat beating more interesting?
Well, I think the way you do that in D&D is with magic items, right? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead, it's fine.
Okay,
I'll just speak after you. I'm reserving the spot after Sean, everybody, so please back.
Raise your hands, kids.
I've done that before, okay? I've done that in shows before. I was like, hello.
It made me feel bad when you did that in Seekers, because then I was like, oh.
It was perfect.
All right, we got to get to Faye.
It was the perfect character. Don't worry about it.
You were playing a very meek reserved character, which is good, yeah.
Yeah. What I was gonna say is like that's what one of the big issues I have with trying to put decisions into combat is you can have very like in-depth and like there's costs and benefits choices in combat. But if you play like games where you actually make tactical decisions, you will freeze on those hard choices and you will take like 5 minutes to go through your turn. And I find that when people have a lot of choices before them and there isn't an immediately obvious best solution, they will take a long time to go through their turn. And when you're playing at a table with like 4 or 5 people, I think you're better off running fast combats than super detailed and choice-driven combats. So what I was going to say, though, is that D&D kind of already has a system for, like, you have more choices if you really need them with, like, expendable magic items through, like, potions and wands. The idea that you're in a bad situation, okay, this is something where I want to do a little more than just do my basic attack every round. Let me pull out my magic wand of size alteration so I can make their, like, big fighter half the size, right? And, like, help make this combat easier. And that's where it's like, okay, I'm going to spend the irrecoverable resources is where the harder decisions come in D&D combat. That's the design they have for that.
Yeah, that is pretty legit, actually. It's true.
So I do agree with Sean on the choice paralysis meta. I think that is already a huge problem anyways, especially if you're looking at 5e D&D. I personally have huge troubles if I'm playing a caster using my spells efficiently, because I know my spells, but like situations change, and in 5e you can change the spells you're using, and it makes it sometimes, if you're level 10, you know, you're having a hard time because you have a lot of spells that you need to know and that you need to control, and adding other choices on top makes it really hard, which I'm cool with. Like, I'm a person who is entirely cool with having a 4-hour battle. Totally my jam. We can do that. It's like, yo, today is a battle session, all good. It's not for everybody. You know, other people prefer shorter battles and they want them to be like 1 hour long or whatever. I think the higher level is, the longer your combat is going to be. And then you'll have to know how much complexity can you add to that. I believe if you have fewer players, for example, if you're only 2 players, then you have more options to actually do, you know, different things and add more mechanics and just make things more interesting, because there's nobody else waiting for you, right? Like, it's not like everybody else is just sitting in their seat, not even listening to what you're doing while you're reading your 15 spells or whatever. And of course, we can discuss putting timers on things and all these things, but, you know, I just want to look at it in regards to complexity. So if you want to add stuff, it's probably easier with fewer people, or you have to be ready to make it a longer combat, you know? Unless you're playing with people who are okay with being rushed. You know, it's like, I think it's a very, very.
How did you feel about the way I put pressure on players in Seekers? Because I guess only you and Sean can really talk about this, but I would pretty consistently, after a few moments of deliberation, kind of push and say, like, this is happening, what do you do? This is happening, what's your response? Like, and I put that kind of meta pressure on you. Was that unwarranted? Was that something that enhanced it, or what? How did you feel about that situation?
Well, I felt perfectly fine with it, but I'm okay with being rushed in those situations. But what I can tell is from Seekers, from our experience, was also that the higher our levels were, the shorter our combats had to be, because we had more choices. Right? Like, we had very few sessions which were like 4 hours of combat or something, which then turns into, if you have less combat time, people get fewer turns, right? So you might run into a situation where you have, oh, this is the combat of the session, but one person goes to go 2 times, you know, and you're like, that's kind of not what you want, right? Especially if you're setting up a strategy. If you're a spellcaster, you're like, I'm going to cast this, I'm going to move there, I'm going to do, right? You want to do a strategy, but in the end, you've only accomplished like 2 things in the whole run through, right? That could be a little bit frustrating.
I mean, I would say though, like, how many times do you hear Neal say 6-second rounds, especially in 5e? I mean, you've got maybe a minute and 2e to think about it, but in 5e, I guess you've got to make your decisions with pretty quickly. Maybe not 6 seconds, but like, you know, especially if you're like a level 10 caster, you should probably, like, your actual character is obviously going to be very familiar with his spells, but also the player is probably very familiar with the spells and the options. So the fact that your character has to decide within 6 seconds, it's pretty reasonable to ask the player maybe to decide within like 10 to 15 seconds.
Sure, it is. If you're like on a show, maybe. No, it's fine. Like, I'm just saying, there's a different thing if you're on a show and you have to rush along, right? Or if you're playing with friends and they're sitting back, right?
Well, I don't even think it's about this show. I mean, I feel like if you could sit back and min-max the combat, especially for casters, like if you could sit back and min-max and think through every decision, as much as you can, that's going to lead to a much different experience than like if you play chess, for example. Like I was pretty good at chess, but my whole life I only ever played like chess where you can take as much time as you want. You start trying to play like 5-minute chess games where you only got 5 minutes for the whole game. You know, I'm gonna lose. I lost so much. Like it's so hard to make tactical decisions in short periods.
I still
of time.
can't do 5-5 games. I have to do 15-10. I can't do 5-5, man.
I absolutely agree with that, and I didn't mean that you know you shouldn't rush your players through decisions. Or I'm just saying, if you're adding more complexity, you're doing that so your person has more choices, right? You're making it obviously. You give them more choices, but you still expect them to make that choice within 6 seconds. And that is like a clash of two things that you have to consider. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying giving people more options on top of the stuff they already have, you know, is a challenging thing, and you have to apply to the right people.
I was hoping
Some people
to
might get
accomplish-
frustrated, right?
I was hoping to accomplish a feeling of like hecticness and pressure, because I feel like a combat where we pause the game and really look at it tactically and take our time loses some of that value. Ultimately, D&D especially is less of a war game and more of a game about small-scale skirmishes. Those are messy and short and chaotic, yet fast. And so I think that you're bringing up a good point in that we should probably allow players to make some choices and feel good about themselves. But I was hoping to get make your choice under some pressure, right? Like I feel like that's a characteristic of combat that I would value if we're trying to flesh it out, which is why I DM kind of that way.
Yeah, I think it was good in Seekers. I will say I have only a limited amount of like sympathy for the like I got so many choices I can make in this instant, because you have the entirety of everybody else's turn to think through what you're gonna do here. And part of the reason that I like to push people along in combat to like make their decisions fast is because the time you spend making your decision is time that everybody else is spending waiting for you to make your decision, right? Nobody can play while you're playing in a combat. So like I think there's a certain onus on players who pay attention while the fight is happening and like use the time where other people are taking their actions to think about what they want to do. And there's like spellcasting in D&D has a lot of problems, right? Like I'm with Faye here. Faye had it worse than me. Like I was playing a cleric and that was hard enough, but like druids have it even worse because you have like all the shape changing that you have to deal with. But
And
like
it's a bonus action, and you know it's a different kind of action than your speller, so you blah blah blah. It's like it gets like druid is very frustrating in 5e. Holy shit!
I remember in chat at one point.
Shapeshifter. Oh god.
I don't remember which game it was in, but at one point somebody in chat was complaining like it seems like Sean isn't paying attention when other people are roleplaying. It's like, man, I fucking want to, but I gotta like this is my valuable time to sort out my spell list. Like I gotta do this.
I'm also not like I absolutely agree. You should be somebody who's obviously preparing your shit when it's happening. But I've had so many situations. I mean, tell me then you don't have the situation all the time where you're like, oh, I'm gonna use that spell. Okay, you read the spell. Okay, you figure it out. You're like, all right, something happens, doesn't apply anymore. You gotta shoot the spell out. And you're like, well, I'm using my sling. You know that happens all the time.
It does happen. Yeah,
Like,
that's true.
Can't do that. Happens like to me. That happens all the fucking time. And that's not a negative thing, and it rushes people along. But if that happens all the time, and I want to refer back to the theater of mind because I love theater of mind. But if your DM imagines something differently than you do, and you rely on your spells,
That
for
is,
example,
yeah,
to
that
cast
is the
them,
problem, actually.
and you're there, and you've prepared the spell, and then the DM is like, oh, no, but there's this giant rock in the way, and you're like, what rock? You haven't told me about it. Yes, I did tell you. It was like when was Greg's turn back, you said, and I was like, oh shit, I didn't fucking, and that suddenly all your planning fucking out of the window, and you're like, and suddenly you're also taking up time again, unless you're saying, I hit him with my quarterstaff,
I think that you need to like as a GM you got to be like accommodating when there's that disconnect between what you were thinking and what the player was thinking and like work with them there. But one of the things that I think D&D actually had the right idea for, even though they did not execute it well, is the idea of you declare your action in advance, and if the thing that you want to do is no longer relevant when your turn comes up, guess you don't need to do anything on this turn. Guess you go next time, right? And I wish they did that. I wish they had executed that better, because I like that. And like if you design your combats in a way where like somebody losing a round isn't going to screw everyone over, like it's not the end of the world.
You can only really do that in situations where combat rounds are short, though.
Yeah.
And there are many of them. Because if you have, like, 3 rounds until combat's over, because the players are able to do it very quickly, or there's, it's so big that it needs to wrap up fast, then if someone loses their turn, they're missing out on a whole bunch of stuff. You can only really do the situations change, you can't take your action if you're going to have a fairly quick combat that extends for a long time, where the rounds go by quickly,
I think,
bigger
yeah,
and
no,
more
I agree with you
complicated you get,
there.
the more important each individual action becomes.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, especially in the context of like 5e, where rounds start to take a very long time, that could be bad. But like with older school D&D, like where rounds take 5 seconds because you do
where it's
one
a little
thing.
bit more hack and slash.
Yeah, I think that would work better in that context.
To go back to Greg's original point, though, like I don't think that 5e needs any more options. I feel like there's by far enough choice.
I think a lot of people would
5e.
disagree with that. That's very interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
So what I think Greg was hinting at, and what I would like to see, and I've kind of played with, is to give the martial classes similar options to what wizards have. So as spellcasters get higher in level, they get all these crazy spells. Whereas a fighter just gets better and better at rolling their d20.
But only in 2e, not in 5e. In 5e, they get options, right?
Yeah,
Not really.
in 5e you can play a battle master, and if you really want like fighter, everybody is a spellcaster, you can play 4e because that's what that game was designed to be.
Yeah.
I mean,
the kind of-
Battlemaster's the only true warrior in 5e anyways. Champions are boring as hell, so...
Champions are pretty boring.
But they're the best, right? Champions are the ones that get
Yeah,
increased crits.
I mean, on paper.
On
I
paper,
did.
they
I will
do the
say
most damage.
I did have fun with my champion for the like one session where he was still alive in Seekers. That was pretty cool. Like champions are fun if you want to just hit
Just
things
can't
really
keep
good and make big
characters
numbers.
alive.
Yeah. So,
I really liked this character until he died. I hear that constantly, and then I'm like, "Well, how did you like the character you finished with?" He was like my 6th choice. Shit. Well, why'd you jump into the pool? Damn.
Oh my god.
so yeah, the kinds of systems I've tried to come up with are like rock paper scissors type systems, where you you strategize like what kind of attack am I making versus my enemy. And those kind of work for like dueling. Like you choose whether you're going to attack versus block, or like whether you want to make a hack or a stab, or like if you use your warhammer versus plate mail, it punctures through it, versus using a sword does more damage. I don't know, like things like that. But I've never had much success getting those things to stick or feel right.
That's fair.
So
I absolutely support the idea of duels becoming more granular, where ribbons in the air meet stone falling from the mountain.
No.
Yeah, but like
He
what you're
doesn't even
talking
have
about,
to say the name, and everyone knows.
we talked about it for like an hour last time. Ryan, what you're talking about though, like the parry skill in 2e,
Yeah.
that only
Sucks.
really ever became
It's a-
useful when you have plus 21 to hit, but it was
Yeah.
actually really useful at that point.
It's only useful if you're like a level 15 fighter versus a level 1 fighter, and you've got more attacks, and you can just block to negate their attacks.
I used it in
Frame this
Pro.
discussion briefly before we fall too much down the 2e rabbit hole, and we can
Hey,
go
no.
back. We can come back to it, but
Okay.
let's. I've originally phrased the question so I could try to get a gauge of what we all think a emotive, interesting, involved combat would be. And it sounds to me like there's kind of 2 core things here. There's fast action, right? It sounds like all of you are not interested in action that bogs down and takes tons of time for the most part. You want to get to the action and make it happen?
I don't think so. I think they're 2 very different things, and I like playing them both. I think having a 4-hour-long combat where you're using a grid and you're taking 10 minutes with your turn, figuring out the best place to drop your wall of gloom is fun in a different way, right?
Yeah.
It's a different game. It feels more like a board game almost.
Yeah, it's not
than
D&D
playing
to me,
D&D.
that. Yeah.
Sometimes you want that experience, and
Yeah, but in general, I think I do prefer fast combat, and I can see what you were getting at with. I haven't watched the Seekers, but I can get behind I can see what you're trying to do, and that tends to be what I prefer. Like I don't like to get bogged down. I like to keep it fast. Like
So with exceptions, that seems to be the general belief, right?
yeah,
Okay.
generally.
Neal, you look very distressed.
I think it doesn't have to be a choice, right? You can use both.
I don't think
Yes.
it's
Is that why you're
the
waffling, Neal?
speed that makes it interesting. I think what makes combat interesting is when you feel like you have an interesting decision or a good decision to make. And I feel often in D&D, you're like, we're in combat. What does damage and how can I do damage becomes the main line of thinking, and all of these like other really useful things that you could do stop. Like,
What are
coming into
the
view.
okay? So as a professional AD&D
Well,
hacker,
as a professional Dungeons and Dragons player, I would like to see more grapple maneuvers from my players and everyone else.
so there are grapple rules in
There are,
AD&D.
absolutely.
There
Yeah, but-
are charts and charts and charts and charts of armor class and weapon detail and weapon versus armor and maneuvers for each individual weapon for the fighter. There are segments within rounds that I see everyone drop. There's weapon speeds and timers. This granularity exists and largely was discarded by people who played the game and by yourself, who, when you look at your own hacked rules, has disregarded much of the granularity of the game in favor of more simpler things. So is it the options of the
I think we still tend to
items?
use those things. Like we still use the options. Just it's the charts they bog down. So Neal will
Do
still.
you though?
I think so. Neal will still often do the like grappling, wrestling, breaking chairs over heads. But instead of like looking up a table, it's just like, okay, resolve it with strength check. I don't want to dig into these.
Yeah,
So you've
sometimes the rules
simplified
get
an
messy.
entire chart
Yeah,
of
you-
options into a single maneuver.
Kind
Yeah,
of.
no, okay.
Or
Well,
like
depends
instead
on
of
the maneuver
consulting
we're
the tables.
talking about here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I'm
Sometimes-
saying is that like if you're fighting the Lich and he's casting spells, everyone's like, well,
You
I'm
shouldn't
gonna try
grapple him anyways, that's a
lightning
terrible
bolt. I'm
idea.
gonna do this thing, but like, what if you just handcuff the Lich's hands together? You know, two people grab him and you lock his hands together. Or what if you like? There's a lot of other options. You're
We
fighting
kind
this
of did
person.
that.
Lich, you'll get cursed
What if
for
you
all
try
eternity.
to?
Yeah, I honestly
use a
feel, Neal, if
disarm?
someone
What if
tried
you
to
try
do
and make
that,
maybe.
you'd kill them if they did something stupid.
Don't
It
touch the
depends on-
fucking lich, no matter what he's saying now.
It All right, replace Lich with any other spellcaster. You know.
So this
Or
is the
you're fighting
heart of, I
somebody,
think, what
maybe
my
we
question
can use
is.
a disarm maneuver. What to me makes combat interesting is when you have options that are other than here are my stated spells and my stated attack options that I use all the time, and exploring these other things and coming up with the like.
So Neal,
Let's
let
hide
me
in the
let me
ditch
just.
is
I'm going to
fun.
give the floor right back to you, right?
Love it.
But this comes to the heart of my question. So if we've established that what makes a good combat, it's the options as a player to make that are interesting and cool. How do we provide interesting and cool options to the player? Right? That they want to use and they're going to be fun in the game and in the moment. How do we support the player making the choice to do something other than swing their sword?
Neal doesn't want to do the players' work for them. He wants them to come up with the interesting options and bring them to
But
him.
if you provide nothing but a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, right? Isn't that the classic
That is the classic.
quote?
So
So
here-
how do we support players in making those types
So,
of decisions?
I feel like there are two ways you can go about this. You can go here is a system that works for a world, and you can make sense of any options within this like system that isn't maybe necessarily here are your attack options. Or you can go the complete opposite and be like, here are 500 things you can do in combat, and here are rules for how they work, and you can use any of these, and there's a shit ton of them because they cover every possibility. And I think those are the two routes too. I think the middle ground of like, well, here's 10 things you can do that aren't just hacking and slashing will help like limit people into these boxes. And I think you either want to go like, here's everything you could conceivably do, or, well, here's a world, figure out what you want to do, and then find the middle ground. And I think if you want to encourage people to do that, you have to show them that it's an option by having their enemies do it to them.
Yeah, I was
So,
gonna
like-
say exactly that. You can paint those sorts of things as the GM by, like, if you as a GM have every NPC pull out a weapon, then the players are always gonna pull out a weapon, right? But if you as a GM have NPCs pull out like blackjacks and try and tackle people to the ground and just rough them up, then PCs are gonna be less quickly to escalate to lethal force, right?
There was a
Or if
moment in our Dicing with Death game a couple days ago, where there were 2 soldiers like guarding an unconscious person, and the player character had to like going to go pick up the person, like save them and take them home or whatever. And I was trying to create a situation where the guard was not trying to fight the player character, but was trying to like take a defensive maneuver to guard the body and like resist incoming attacks in a way to like do some separation so that the other soldier could like pick up the person and run. And I wanted to like leave one guy as a non-aggressive.
And
just
what happened,
blocking
Neal?
the path. What happened is my player argued with me until he got angry and he just made an
The
attack roll.
tumbling whatever guarding rules are so complicated. I got frustrated that I made an attack roll and I crit them in the face and I just killed them.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. Which is maybe not the greatest outcome. I mean, that actually was fine because it wasn't so much about what you were doing. It was about the guard's option here is I'm not going to kill. I'm going to put myself in the most defensive position possible because I want this person to be like taken back to our base. And I think introducing elements like he's not killing you, he's just blocking you from your objective in the most annoying way by like giving himself added defense while not
And
making
I guess
an aggressive
like,
move.
and in that, it did make me as a player feel
So-
like he was in my way. But
I think that
go
this.
ahead.
I'm sorry to cut you off because I know that this is like your moment, but I feel like we're kind of at odds with how this is designed or how this question's going, right? So you've set up a really interesting encounter, right? You've created a situation where the encounter is not this guy wants to fight the PC. Like he doesn't want to fight Ryan. He wants to protect something from Ryan and get in the way. And that is a really cool world building and it makes the encounter memorable and interesting. But then the interesting, memorable encounter happened, and Ryan went, okay, I've tried my words, I've tried my body language, now it's time for physical, conflict resolution.
It's because we spent 5 minutes like arguing. Okay, how does this work? Can I just walk around him?
I've
What do
used
I have
my
to
words, I've
through
used
them?
my fictional positioning. It is time for physical conflict resolution. And now we've reached physical conflict resolution.
I mean, it got so complicated trying to do the alternatives that it was like, okay, I don't really care that much. We'll resolve this with a d20 roll, and I'll.
How do we make Ryan choose, instead of I take my weapon out and crit him in the face, I put him in an armbar or something else? I think that by putting up this interesting encounter, you've done a great job of encounter building and world building. But I think that where my discussion point comes is we've passed that. We've gotten past encounter building, and now it's time to lay some hands. How do we make the feeling of laying on hands more engaging and invite more options?
How do you encourage the player to do something other than just like punch the guy in the face?
Yeah, and they don't have. It doesn't have to be exactly reciprocal. Like the NPC can take a guarding position and try and defend the kidnapped person, and the player can be like, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna kill you," and that's fine. And we're not like trying to make the player do something different then, but then setting the stage so when the player is defending something, they can be like, "Hey, remember that guard maneuver you used on me like last week? I'm going to use it on you now by guarding this thing and not letting anyone past me and raising my AC but not actually going for an attack." And I think it's the like non-standard options that can be utilized that a player might actually have to think about that bring the game to life and to fun.
Yeah, and like I think there's a mistake in trying to build all these things into a system, right? You don't need more than a couple of broad options that people can fit a large variety of actions under.
That's a really interesting take coming from you, who I was recommending rules light games to because I thought they would fit your style of play, and immediately came back and told me I just don't feel like there's enough bite to these systems.
There's not enough for me to lawyer over. How?
So like I guess I feel as if that there are ways that we can do this that are more than just I want my players to fill the gaps via role play and decision making. I feel like we can give options something to chew on that are interesting and are a little bit different than I swing a sword, I swing a sword, I swing a sword, right? One way that we know has been tried before is the really deep granularity of combat. One way that has been tried by very rules-light systems, like apocalypse world or dungeon world is to have a limited number of rules and say you can take these broad actions and fill in the gaps like you're saying. But oftentimes chief among them as an example, right? But like oftentimes people come back and say these rules light games don't give me the feel I'm looking for, right? There's not enough to them. So what I think would be interesting is to think about ways that we can allow for interesting combat, not pre-combat, not an encounter that's built, because the encounter is cool. My picture is crooked and that made me upset. Okay. Like world building and encounter building is really good, and making memorable encounters is important. But once we've gotten past the point of encounter building and it is time to throw hands, how do we make the fighter feel different than the ranger? How do we make the pugilist? What if I wanted to play a pugilist? What if I wanted to play, is his name Mickey from Snatch? That guy is a fighter. He could take 1,000,000 hits and keep coming. You could beat the living shit out of him, but then he's gonna beat you with his fists. If I was that's a cool character design, and it's something that you can imagine filling a space in a party. But if I wanted to play that in 2e, or I wanted to play that in 5e, I'm not mechanically supported to really swing my fists, right? And one of the things you immediately brought up is I would like some grapple rules. How do we support Mickey the pugilist from Snatch? If I wanted to play that, how would we do that? Maybe we'll have a little more focused look at it.
You play a monk at that point. Right, and I get that some people are gonna say like, oh, but I'm not looking for a monk, I'm looking for a fighter who fights with their fists. And my response is that I don't really want to support that in my games. Like, I am bothered by the idea of characters just saying catch these hands to people who are equipped with deadly weaponry that they are trained to use. I wouldn't support that in my games.
Yeah, but I mean, this is a stand-in for any other particular problem.
Okay,
Right,
I want to
fair.
play a ranged paladin.
Okay, sure.
Pugilist 5e PDF exists, by the way. Just in case you're interested out there. I'm not criticizing anybody, but it is a thing. If you want to play on 5e, you can play that. Not saying
I
it's well done or
understand that
not.
people
but
have
it is a
homebrewed
thing.
it, right? I understand that there are homebrews out there. I guess my thought is, without having homebrewed it myself or using somebody else's, like, other than, I was just trying to give a very specific example so that I could highlight what it is I think that we're missing in the conversation. Like,
I think so.
giving
I think
options
there are
is a thing we can do.
there are two things with options that have come up and that are very different from each other, at least for me. The first thing is the options your character has in combat that are combat related, that are only what are all the attacks I can use, what are the weapons I can use, what are the maneuvers, like grappling. Grappling is still like a combat maneuver for me. Then there's another situation, which is like what Ryan explained, trying to defend somebody with your body, walking around the wagon, trying to find a way out that is not combat related. I don't think those things are necessarily the same, and I think you can, try to work on one or the other. I think they can be two very different things. For example, I have a suggestion, which is not a very popular one probably, but for the give more options that are not just fighting and drawing your weapon or punching somebody or grappling somebody. I often have the problem that I do suggest things that are not, that are persuasion related, or that are like what you would call a maneuver in other games, which is, you're using your skills to do something in combat. And then it fails. The more often those things fail in your sessions, the more disheartened you are to use them, because you're going to be like, everybody is going to club the goblin to death, and you're like, but I wanted to try to, I wanted to use tongues, but it didn't work. You're going to be the idiot. Everybody's going to be like, well, can't you just fight for one single time, right? And of course, both are extremes, and you shouldn't do either all the time. But sometimes extending a hand and being like, listen, Ryan, you've been running around the cart for 4 hours now, what you could do is you could, do this, or you could do that, or you could do, the other thing. And then maybe Ryan has an idea of what Neal is doing in his head, because Ryan doesn't know what all the options are Neal considers, to be right. And if you tell Ryan 50 times no, then Ryan is gonna draw his fucking sword, because fuck, that shit is frustrating, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, I'm not saying all the time you should tell people, these are your options, look at all the options. but let them figure it out. And if they get frustrated and they reach the point where, like, you know, you can tell when people are getting frustrated. Give them 2 more chances, and then you're like, but maybe you could do this or that, or and then they can make the decision. And if they think that's all rubbish, they can still draw their sword, But in that situation where they try to figure it out really hard, and you want to support that kind of gameplay, like lend them a little hand sometimes, it's not the worst thing to do.
Mm-hmm. So I see what Greg is trying to do in separating the encounter building, world building from the actual combat system. And I like where you're going with that. I want to see what we could come up with in terms of making a better, more interesting, more rich combat system. But to make a counterpoint, I don't know that you can just cleanly separate the encounter building from the combat system. I think the encounter design encourages the combat options you have. Yeah. So like Neal's good encounter design encourages you to come up with something other than just punching the guy.
I was trying to separate that very specifically to try to guide the discussion away from, hey, dummy, make good encounters, right? Because we've talked about encounter building on the show before, and I didn't want to rehash, this is how we believe you should build encounters, right? I was trying to get at something a little different, right? Because I 100% agree, right? One of the best things that I think a new DM can learn is to not place combat encounters on their tables or in their world. When you're building a session, don't go, oh, we're going to fight 12 orcs. Instead, say, oh, the party's going to find 12 orcs and they have a prisoner, or these 12 orcs are hunting something and the party finds them, or these 12 orcs are all carrying treasure back to their lair, right? And those types of different things they could do. Or the party stumbles upon 12 orcs who are setting up camp because it's becoming daylight and they don't do well in the sun. Right? Things like that add so much to your combat, so much to the world, right? And that is 100% something I agree with wholeheartedly, and I think is important, and it's an important lesson. I think that kind of encounter building could solve some people's questions about combat enrichment, but I do think I really go back to something that Nick said, and I think it's something that a lot of people feel is once combat starts, eventually, not every time, sometimes you have a cart guy and you got to run around for an hour, but many fights devolve into, I'm going to impose my martial superiority over this creature in some way. And the way we do that, I think, can be more interesting than the way that it's currently being expressed. And I think it would be very interesting to think about the ways that we might be able to give a little bit of flavor to Nick's age-old I swing, you swing problem.
So are you talking about just options for attacking, right? Because I remember in 3rd edition, there's a thing called power attack, which is basically you can sacrifice some, I think it's you take a -5 to hit, but you do +5 damage or something like that.
Sure.
That alone as one thing would add a bit more decision making to the fighter in deciding, is this guy low armored? Do I sacrifice that?
Having powers like that is definitely an option. So the way I saw it, I had an idea of what my systems would be like, and I was trying to get you guys to give me your ideas so that we could kind of compare.
Okay.
I see it as there's an old way. The classic way is the equipment lists. We build in your decisions based on the equipment that you have, right? You might bring a Kopesh if you want to disarm people. You might bring a man catcher. You might bring a maul, and those tags on the weapons and compared to the charts and things give you built-in options. And I kind of feel like that kind of granularity often takes away from combat, in my opinion. And I think there's a reason why a lot of people kind of get rid of it. Another option is that I have seen as an attempt at this is kind of the 5e edition, where they built it into subclasses, right? you have the ability to do specific things in your subclass: Paladin's Smite, Rogue's Backstab. The subclass for different monks have different abilities, and by having access to a subclass, you have access to a set of skills that other people don't, and it's a set of options in combat. I also find that to be lacking for different reasons. Mainly that it kind of promotes it promotes class bloat, because every time you want to have a different option in combat, you need another subclass built to support it, and it kind of gives you this like class quote unquote warfare, I guess, where it's like, what if I want to fight in that style? I want options like that, but I'm not that class, right? If I'm not the base class, then I can't fight in that way, and I find that to be an unsatisfying way to play. And another way that I saw this being established or attempted is with the kind of video game aspect, where you have powers. 4th edition, 3rd edition kind of did some of this. You have powers that are once per combat, once per day, once per round. And they give you options. And I think all of those have their benefits. All of them have their flaws. And I think that there's some interesting options there to try to spice up your combat and make it feel more alive and give you as the player ways to do more than I swing my sword.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the reasons I push back against this, I, at one point, I don't know how good this terminology is, but I like the distinction that was drawn. I saw somebody make a distinction between tactics and strategy. And their argument was that tactics are the decisions you make inside of a combat, and strategy are the decisions that you make in setting up the combat, right? So like when you prepare the ambush in advance, that is a strategy. When you're making the choice between 3 different flavors of attack, that is a tactic.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that distinction. And generally speaking, I've reached the point where I try to emphasize strategy over tactics, because most examples I've seen of people trying to insert lots of tactics into a combat don't work. They bog the game down. They make it go very slowly. And they often don't, they make it unapproachable for people who are not familiar with the system, and they're not really that engaged with by people who are. Because when you try to create like 5 different ways that people can make an attack, it really just comes down to, well, I can do the attack where I make a controlled thrust and I have a +4 to my hit, but I do half damage on connection. Or I have my angry chop where I gain a disadvantage on my attack roll, but it's an automatic crit if I hit. And those sound like interesting choices you can make until you consider that it comes down to a math equation where people are going to find what is the best choice in this specific context, and then they're just going to spam it again and again.
Yeah, I agree.
So the reason I emphasize encounter design so much is because if you only create combats in ways that are meant to measure the ways PCs can do violence on the world, every combat is going to feel like a very like one action again and again mosh pit. And the only way you could really counteract that would the other issue is like those tactics games, right? Like Final Fantasy Tactics, you make a lot of interesting decisions. You're also controlling every character in the battle. It's a lot harder to do that when you are one person working with a team of other people. So generally, the reason I push back against it so much is because like I don't think your optimal solution is to try and shove a lot of new like tools that people can use in a combat situation. It's to try and like build in tools people can use to engage in combat in different ways, right? Like grappling is an important thing to have. This is one thing that I actually like about 5e is that they put in a really easy to use grappling system to that game. And grappling is the kind of thing that should be emphasized in these games because it gives you another way to fight people, right? You can be used to hold somebody down while your friend just stabs them in the face, or you can use it to like not kill people, right? And I think that's how you put interesting choices into violent altercations in a game like D&D, is to emphasize strategy in cases where it matters, and to emphasize like you make a choice and you stick with it. And that's also why I like short combat games, because it's a lot more fun when the combat's over in 3 rounds than when you're doing the same thing for 10. I feel like I got a little bit off track there partway through, but
Yeah,
It happens
I
to me
think-
all the time.
I think it is better to not redefine the tactical options
Mhm.
and come up with them on the fly and then improvise the rules on the fly, which
That's
makes it
why
difficult to present these options to your players because you don't have them. But if you can show them to your players, then they will be like, oh, I can do outside of the box things. I don't just have attack. I have, like, I want to kick sand in this person's eye. Maybe if I can get sand in their eye, they'll be blind for a round and won't be able to do something. Or maybe I will do the, like, I'm going to drop my pants and walk away so you'll come after me so my other friend can get around you, sort of whatever.
Mhm.
You know, I think the trying to define tactical options is well intentioned, but in the long run is bloaty and slow.
I think it's necessary to encourage people to do it, though.
Yes,
Because
and
if
that's
Encouraging
you-
is important.
If you
that's
wanted to drop your pants and make somebody come after you, maybe that works with Neal because that's the type of thing he's into. But maybe when Ryan,
I don't know. Are you to drop dance, Neal? Tell us about
but
it.
when
I mean, who
Ryan
isn't?
DMs, maybe that doesn't get their goat, right? And if there's no mechanical
That gets my
support
goat.
for you,
then you
to
have
taunt,
AC 10 on your buttocks, and I get a free
Yes.
shot.
So I think that giving a mechanical definition of some of the things you can do is necessary so that you can have support for the style of play that you want, right? If taunting and getting under someone's skin is really important. Like, think about Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali talked mad shit while he was fighting people, right? And that's part of what made Muhammad Ali so great. He managed to get people to open themselves up and do things they wouldn't normally do because this man's mouth is running nonstop, right? And like that is something that I think could be supported in Dungeons and Dragons.
Here's
right?
where you need to, as a GM, encourage the behavior that you want to see in your players. And I think this is a good point that Anna-Sophie made earlier, is right to encourage your players, right? If you keep trying to make these skill checks in combat and they wind up flubbing, then you're going to stop making them and devolve to just making your attack rolls.
Yeah.
I worry that making that a specific maneuver can be kind of a problem. Then it becomes just a thing that you do every time in combat. Like if it says under the intimidate skill that you can just make an intimidate check to give an opponent a penalty to hit on success, then that takes a lot of the flavor out of it. I think I kind of agree with Neal here, and that the best way to approach this is to just encourage your players to be creative. And if they're going to role play smack talk, be willing to give out disadvantage on their opponents or penalties to their opponents' rolls. But I think it needs to be an inconsistent enough thing that they're not just like, all right, it's a new combat, I intimidate them. It's got to be it's got to be supported by the fiction, supported by the encounter design.
This is why I appreciate game systems that encourage people to phrase their action by intent, right? Like when the game system very specifically says you don't just say I'm going to drop my pants and shout at them. It's like you want to say I'm going to drop my pants and shout at them because I want to get their attention and try and distract them from the rest of the combat. Then if I as a GM don't like this, if we're on two separate wavelengths, I can step in right there and be like, okay, let's talk about what you're trying to do and let's find a way that we can reconcile our differences here. I like intent-based gameplay for that exact reason.
Are you sure you don't want to play Dungeon World?
I almost brought
I
this up.
feel like I've said the same thing at some point before.
I will say, every time I like read a Powered by the Apocalypse game, it seems like the kind of thing I would love on paper, and then I'm just miserable in practice.
We talked about this at length on Friday night, and it's like everything you're saying now is like, I'm pretty sure I was right the whole time, John.
Well, okay, but here's the other way of looking at it. I've been reading RuneQuest, right? And that's a very granular sort of combat system. It also encourages phrasing by intent. You can do it without this weird abstract narrative bullshit that games like Dungeon World do.
Okay. Abstract narrative bullshit? That's fine.
It's okay, Faye. We'll play Dungeon World without him.
I think we'll be just fine.
I will
Greg,
say,
you and I
have more fun playing Dungeon World than I do running it. I had a lot of fun when I was a player in Dungeon World. I got very frustrated when I had to GM it.
I feel like it's too wishy-washy to see much character development, right? It seems like most of
I don't know
I
what
know.
you mean. My leprechaun punching pugilist was the best character ever.
Wait, hold on. Did
He
you
had a
punch
full
leprechauns,
arc.
or were you a leprechaun who punched?
He punched leprechauns.
Okay.
How,
Oh, I thought he was a leprechaun
What
as well.
campaign
Okay, I'm
setting
glad
were you
we figured
in?
it out.
what campaign setting there were enough leprechauns for you to make a career out of hunting them down and punching
So
them?
one of the things that I like to do with Dungeon World is to create one-shots for people. And the way that I learned to do this is from the leprechaun punching guy that I made. And it was a friend of mine, and he came to the table with no prep and like 18 index cards. And he said, and he went around the table and he's like, what do you want to play? And they were like, I want to play a ranger. And he said, great, here's the ranger toolbook. What do you like to do as a ranger? And he built this character, and then he went to the next person and said, what do you want to do? And I said, I'll be a fighter. I want to punch things. He's like, here's the fighter playbook. And we went around the table, we built these characters, and then he went to each person and he said, how do you know this person? How do you know this person? How do you know this person? What do they mean to you? What do they mean to you? What's one thing about the world that you know? And he would phrase it differently than that. He was like, Ranger, you've stalked these woods for the last 18 years. What is the biggest threat in these woods? And he wrote it down when they answered. And then he went to the fighter and he was like, fighter, who are you protecting in these woods? Right? And then like so on and so forth. And he built a living world, and then he
got to you, and he said, what do you like to
down-
do? And you said, I punch leprechauns?
No, I didn't start punching leprechauns. I was
for interrupting.
trying to protect the Feywild with my fist, with my ranger buddy. We were buddies, and they had a terrible secret about me, and I knew they had showed me the ways of the forest, so like I was gonna protect them. That was our bond. And then it turns out that there was a twist, and the leprechauns were greedy bastards that were stealing things from children. So when we found them, right, and their pot of gold, I was like, wait a minute, these aren't happy forest spirits. We got to punch them in the dick. And the ranger was, no, I said, we got to beat them up. And the ranger was like, that's not enough. You got to punch them in the dick. And I was like, you bet. And so we went from like protect the forest to like, now we got to seek out the leprechauns and start handing out some like fists, you know? But Dungeon World is allowed to be very freeform in that way, and he built all the places based off the things we said, and he would write them on cards, made me make a doodle and put it on the table, and we would start taping them together as we went places. And after about 3 or 4 acts, we wrapped it up in one big like climactic battle with a leprechaun. It turns out leprechauns were very much like gnomes. They built like some lepre mech, and it was very fun, right?
They
and
built
it was
a
very
leper mech?
Yes.
Did
it was very
invoke
Would they all
leprosy?
go in and it would be like a giant robot thing, like a trans?
Yeah, like they built
video.
Voltron, but leprechaun
Nice.
style.
I would buy gold.
It was very silly, right? Obviously, but we were a silly group. I've picked up that style when I run Dungeon World. I very rarely run a campaign. I run one-shots like that,
Yep.
and I do 0 prep, and I come to the table with the same list of questions that he had, and I can build a campaign, or I can build an adventure from that. It can be 3 to 6 hours, and it's a lot of fun. I don't know how we got on this.
Yeah. I was
Because
about
my
to ask that.
leprechaun
It was a great
pugilist-
story, but
Mm-hmm.
what was the point?
My point was I have character growth. Character growth is possible in those.
You can grow from a regular pugilist to a leprechaun.
Well, I guess the idea was
pugilist.
that we started off like being very protective of this forest. We thought something was evil going on, and the campaign shifted, and we as characters grew to be like, wait a minute, these little fey spirits are jerks, and they're like stealing things from kids and like kidnapping people, and so we were changing. We grew, and it was kind of a joke. And now I've like gone off on this really big tangent, and I apologize.
Don't worry about it.
It was a fun story. Thanks for sharing.
It was lovely. I love hearing D&D stories from people that they are passionate about. Usually they are just a bunch of silly stuff, but it's good.
I guess,
These are the best stories.
To go back to the point though, like I might just be a little bit biased, but I kind of like the way I like 2E more than 5E. I like that there's limited options, and I think the limited options encourage creativeness in combat because Like if you are just the fighter, you've got to think of something more interesting to do than just swing your sword every time. And I like the way Neal runs it, where for the most part, if you come up with something creative, you at least try and make it work, as long as it's not too stupid. And the problem is that if it is too stupid and you're not really on the same page about what you're looking at, you might end up just getting yourself fucked over. I think this style of play only really works when you've got players who are interested in trying to be creative and aren't just
and a
rolling their
DM
dice.
A DM that wants to see that and encourages it.
But to me, that's the best way for it to work.
Unsatisfying answer.
Yeah.
I find the answer of how do we make things more fun in our game is just have a good DM and be better role players to be very unsatisfying.
Right. That's the lazy way. Like your answer is let's design a new RPG that's better.
I don't think that's my answer. I'm trying to just say let's support things.
Yeah.
I get what
Have you ever watched the movie Troy?
Yes.
No.
God.
I mean,
wait, are we talking
with Brad Pitt?
He's oiled
With
up,
Brad Pitt.
muscled man.
Okay, I've seen this movie. I've seen this movie. I know about.
I've watched Troy 3 times. I'm not gonna lie.
You watched it one more time than me.
Tell me about it, Greg. I want it.
So Troy isn't necessarily my favorite film or anything. Right? It's not a cinematic.
You're awfully defensive there, Greg.
I kind of want to watch this again now.
It features very cool combat, right? These people with spears and shields, like very interesting, dynamic, cool combat. They're using their shield as a weapon sometimes, and it's very fluid, and there's a lot of like interesting things going on beyond stab, right? And I want to somehow I roll my dice to hit, feel less like that, and feel more like I'm Brad Pitt, like going ham sandwich on some Trojans, you know?
So but you're gonna have to roll a die at some point, right? Even if you're Brad Pitt and you're using your shield, you're using your sword. Like, it sounds like what you're calling for is just a better theatrical narrative where you're like, I'm going to make an attack, but it doesn't matter what weapons I'm using, so I'm going to say what this attack roll.
About system and it mattering. Mechanically supporting people is important in the game that we're playing. So if we have some amount of mechanical support to do things like that, then you can support people who do it and encourage others to go down that path. When you don't have support, when a rules system doesn't support you, you have to go beyond the game to do it yourself. And that means that a select group will do it. People with really aggressive imaginations and high amounts of investment in the narrative will do things like that. But the game doesn't help other people do it. And
so I think that
I don't know. I want to disagree with that heavily. Sorry to interrupt, Ryan. I think that you can't make a game system that'll work for everyone all the time, but you can make a system that works for you and your friends. And I think that's what you do by sort of like hodgepodging, throwing rules together. Or, you know, when I play with my friends and my people, we just kind of do it all loosey-goosey, and the good players come up with interesting ideas, and the bad players see the good players come up with interesting ideas and then copy them and mimic them, and it all sort of works out.
Perfectly happy, you know, just rolling dice. That is perfectly fine, by the way. You know, you don't. If that's your kind of play, that's cool. Just defending the people out there who are not also.
Yeah, the bad people also don't have to do anything.
Very good, Neal. Very good.
Yeah, I really appreciate Greg's vision, but I worry that like I don't know how you mechanize stuff like this. I in my mind, the best solution I've seen is to do what Neal described, where like you have a narrative-based table where you describe what's going on in the combat and then you resolve it with your D20 roll.
I want to give people more options.
So
you hold a shield,
you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, you know?
But the trouble, if you give them a maneuver that's...
But if you don't have systems in place, you're not leading them to water.
You want to have a crazy idea.
You're handing them a glass of water with your narrative.
But Greg, didn't you start by saying that this has been tried in 3rd edition, 4th edition, and 5th edition? You've got problems with it. Like I guess I don't see any other way of doing it.
Which is why I thought it would be an interesting topic to like maybe bring up and talk about what things worked well and what things
it's been a very good. It's the first topic.
I think the trouble with the example you gave is, okay, so do we introduce a shield punch ability that lets you punch with your shield for some bonus?
Yeah, I'd like that. I think that would be
better than a regular
option.
attack. Then you just wind up having a battle where instead of spear, you've got shield punch, shield punch.
Does it have to be better?
Because people will choose the most optimal choice.
Okay, but then in theory they have options like that and no one uses them.
then no one will ever do it. And if it's
or you take the right proficiencies and then you get a free shield punch every round.
I disagree.
How do
if you have no choice, people will still do weird shit. There is no choice to create your own magic spell, and yet
only
Yaromir is like, fuck it, I'm making magic, and I'm just gonna fucking declare this shit.
Encourage that behavior.
Right, but what I'm saying is that that is the solution. Is you encourage players to be creative, and then you just like roll with their creativity. Because if you're like, here's shield punch, here's shield bash, here's sword strike, here's sword bash, it just gets to like, well, which is the best for this situation? This is my highest chance to hit and do most damage.
And then like, okay, this is the opponent's stat block for this entire combat. It's advantageous to shield punch, so it just becomes.
Otherwise, it's like
what if it wasn't to hit?
Mm-hmm.
What if you took a ability or a feat or a mastery with your shield, and when you struck them, it did minuscule or 0 damage, but when you're not maybe it could be somebody on your teams, but for your next attack is the way I'm envisioning it, you have a greater chance to hit with your spear, or your spear will do more damage because their shield is now knocked away, or you've hit them in the Achilles and they're hopping around on one foot, right? Like, is there no way whatsoever to mechanicize anything, or can we find creative solutions that might help us be more interesting in combat?
But it's not
what you've described is not a shield ability. What you've described is, I want an ability that gives me an advantage in combat, and then we can flavor it as shield if you're wearing a shield, or you can flavor it as this if you're wearing that. But those options exist all the time. You can knock people prone. That's always a thing that exists.
For things that are interesting, and not just have I take the aid action. Does that make sense?
But no, what you've described is taking the aid action. You're like, okay, I want to knock him I want to knock him down with my shield, and we're gonna call it aid, or we're gonna call it like shove.
There's a reason why no one makes the shove action.
I use the shove action all the time.
Okay, hold on. I think we're approaching this from the wrong direction.
Okay,
right.
give us some civility here.
When you want to design a system in your game, right? You want combat, like you're deciding, how am I going to design combat mechanically? You need to think, what do I want combat to look like? And when I imagine like a big hectic battle with lots of different people.
I know, isn't that how I started? I feel like I tried to do this and no one was interested in discussing it. Like beyond grid is slow and I want it to be faster.
I'm gonna go into something that I think we can get into concretely here, okay? So like when it comes to a big melee where you're like ambushed, I like it to be like quick and brutal and simple, because that's kind of what I go for. I want it to be like this confusing hot mess where you just kind of like make a decision and put your head down and hope you don't die, right? That's what I want out of like a.
And you beat
quick
your meat against metal.
Yeah. You want to be the world's greatest metal on meat beater.
Hot mess.
But when I also can imagine, like, let's take a much more constructed scenario of a duel. Second edition has a very in-depth dueling system in the combat and tactics section, and I have always been enamored with it and wanted to find a way to make that approachable so somebody could try it, because the idea of taking a duel and not just having people roll back and forth at each other until somebody dies, but also putting this like movement mechanic and different maneuvers you can take to turn it into kind of this battle of wits is something that sounds really cool. I like the idea of like honing in and going way more granular with the dual combat, because it's you're creating this idea of like, it's not just two people flailing at each other, it's people in a very like constructed and thought out scenario, like mind gaming each other as much as it is them like.
Have you ever played with that dual system?
I have never tried it.
I looked at it.
It looks cool actually. I like
it looks like a rock paper scissors game.
It is, yeah.
It is, attacking high versus middle versus low.
I tried it once and I didn't like it at all.
Is the name of the game riddled with steel?
Riddled with steel.
Riddled with steel. Something like that.
I've never played it, but the name.
There's a duel system, right, where you have two colors of dice, right? One's an attack and one's a defend, and you keep them hidden, right, until you roll them. And it doesn't. I mean, the numbers matter, right, because they resolve things. But what really matters is which dice did you roll, right? Because no one knows. You could attack, or you could defend, but you can't necessarily do both. There's rules to like what maneuvers you can do, right?
Right.
But that would be a very dynamic way of doing a duel.
Yeah, that does sound cool.
I would love the idea of putting lots of choices and mind games, specifically like mind gamey choices, right, where two people are trying to outthink each other as much as they're trying to.
So why is it that you support deep choices and maneuvers and mind games in that context, but not in combat. Because it sounds to me like you're saying, hey, I really would like this combat to have a lot of like mechanical support for different maneuvers and choices. But if I bring it up in terms of a wider combat, you're like, no, that's fucking bullshit.
Because
right?
because when it comes down to the ambush combat, I think most of the work there should be done at the encounter level. It should be done on the GM's end, right? It should be like you are ambushed by a group of things, and like even from a narrative perspective, you want to zoom out on the scope here, right? You're not like getting into epic duels with every single person who's ambushing you. You're cutting down one bandit who like charges at you, and then you're running up into the trees to try and find these archers who are shooting you from a vantage point. Like that's kind of the scope that I want to focus on, is much quicker and more brutal exchanges between individual people. Whereas in the duel, like no matter how you set up the duel, it's just two people like stepping up and deciding they're going to flail at each other until one of them stops moving. Like that's where I want to hone in way more on that like mind gamey one-on-one experience. Like it's what I want the narrative. I think the difference is that they're narratively different in my head, and I want the mechanics to match that.
You know, it's
Okay,
maybe
can
also
I-
that the encounter can be interesting because of the setup, whereas Sean's right, like the duel is just two people fighting, and it's not inherently interesting in in itself.
So we
I
don't want
think-
interesting combat in encounters.
Well, it could just be
No, I
more. It
do.
can be interesting because of the setting and the.
Yeah.
I entirely
So do we
disagree.
need- so do we
Hello.
need two
Good day.
combat systems?
Entirely wrong. All rubbish. Forget all that was said right now. Entirely possible to achieve what Greg wants. Maybe you have to mechanize it, and I think you can. I think maybe your best chance, off the top of my head, I haven't even tried anything remotely, would be to connect the fighting actions you have with the skills or proficiencies that your character has. So in some way furthering people using their proficiency to somehow infuse their attacks, right? Like if you do the fucking spear jump, right? That's obviously in athletics together with, whatever your normal spear attack is. And then thinking about how can I connect them? Maybe you can create a table with outcomes where like this one is piercing armor, this one is, causing exhaustion, this one is, and then the player explains to you what they are trying to do in conjunction with their proficiency. And then you look at it and you're like, well, would most likely be something like it would exhaust the enemy, or it would you would ruin the armor. Is that something like, and they're like, yeah, I can see that, right? Which is a very mouse guard approach, by the way, which I've recently started, where the player selects the skill.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, I'm using my survivor, right? And then the GM is like, so how are you doing that? And you have to come up with, how am I using this in a fight situation, right? It's obviously not for everybody, but I'm sure there are situations in which you're like, if I can use this proficiency to somehow boost my attack with it, it makes fights more interesting. And I actually do have an example from 2E Neal Akuba Knights, which made me very happy, which was when we were fighting and I was hopeless in combat most of the time. And I fell off my camel, and I was very distraught. And what I did was I used my camel riding proficiency to slap the camel on the ass. And what happened was that, I had to make an animal handling check. Obviously, it was a spear attack with my animal handling check. Camel started charging off and did like a shit ton of damage I could have never done with a single spear attack because, that was a successful thing. It was super fun for me. Like I didn't care about everything else going wrong. But that was kind of a cool thing. I'm not saying you can do that with every attack and you should do that all the time, but I believe that connecting proficiencies or skills with the fight stuff you want to do is a possibility. And I think you can mechanize those things. And you can connect those things in 5e if you wanted to.
Right. And I think what I'm seeing from that, though, is like it worked in 2e, right? Like I feel like you'd be defeating the point if you tried to build a formal table for like, this is how you can have animals charge in combat, because then it just feels like another mundane tool that the players have access
no, you
to.
wouldn't mechanize that, but you would be like, if you wanted to have an orientation, you can have an outcome table for yourself where you're like, well, that would be, it would charge the enemies and just ram through them and deal damage, or it would knock them prone, or it would, and then the player can give you feedback, but no, that's not really what I wanted to do. I wanted to do X, Y, Z. And then you can adjust the outcome for yourself. You're not bargaining really.
2e is a complicated mess, but I'm sure this was probably supported by the system. I didn't actually see this, but I'm guessing what happened is, but you need an open-minded GM who's familiar with the rules to be able to explain how you could mechanize it. But I'm sure that is mechanized, right? You make an animal handling check, and then the camel makes an overrun attack.
Makes a charge attack or something,
Yeah,
a trample or whatever. Yeah.
Like all of these are options in D&D.
Yeah, and I guess my point is like I think part of what makes like that's really cool. And I think part of what makes that so cool is it's a creative idea you had by sort of taking the D&D mechanics and applying them in a creative way that the game didn't necessarily flag as something that you could do, right?
And it requires an interesting encounter design to like
And
set
one
the
camel
scene
at
for
least.
that.
And one camel.
Here's the takeaway for all the new GMs: put camels in your combat.
Yeah.
I love
Make
that
everything
shit.
better.
Look, if you get your players to trample an enemy to death with an animal, like you did good GMing.
So, I mean, but I think this is kind of, it worked in this situation, but I think the problem here is still that it requires an expert GM that's familiar with all of these obscure options and is open-minded
Not
enough to
necessarily.
execute it.
If you have a table that tells you what could happen, if you want to make it simpler, and it's not like you don't need to know if it's 1d6 damage or 2d8 or whatever.
Mhm.
You can always say make an animal handling check, right? That's an obvious thing, and then you can say, well, it most likely is going to be damaging armor, so the enemy gets -2 AC for the next round or something. And that's something you can think of up ahead of time, which you don't need to pull out of any rules. It doesn't need to be extensive. It can be like 6 or 8 options, right? It can be reduce armor, knock prone, whatever, deafen, this and that, that, and then it falls somewhere into this category, and then you can mechanize it on a like smaller level. That might not be as creative as just thinking it up entirely however you want, but it like might be a little bit more mechanized than just figure it out, or just know all the rules. Like I feel like that's an easy take even for DMs who are not that experienced.
I question if you need those mechanics, because I feel like most people who are thinking of a situation in terms of their fictional positioning are like, if you've seen a horse run somebody over before, that shit is terrifying, right? Like that can straight up kill a person really easily, and they will knock you over without even like flinching. I just think that it's one of those things that you can establish through fictional positioning, and you're kind of taking that sort of quality away from it if you try to mechanize it into game rules explicitly, if you try to create that table in advance.
And then you've got to be, I don't know, if the table's too specific, then you wind up with players buying camels as weapons, and then the camel cannon becomes the most effective weapon.
Yeah, I mean, not especially for camels, I mean, a lot, just the effects, right? You're not mechanizing what you can do with your skills. You're just deciding whether that makes sense or not. But the outcome, like a general outcome can be like decided beforehand. Obviously, you don't have to make a camel table, but you can be like, these are things that can happen, and then connect them to a successful check that you think makes sense.
Yeah, but you need the table for is for the outcome. So it's like you've got a sundering attack that damages their armor, and then it's up to the player to role play what they're doing to damage the armor.
Oh, exactly the other way around, right? It's like the player tells you what they're doing.
Okay.
And they connect it to the skill they want to do. They're like, I want to use my spear with animal handling. This is what I want to do. And you as a DM then look at your piece of paper and you say, well, that's a trample. They're going to be prone, and then the player says, oh, yeah, okay, unless they feel they are entirely misunderstood. So it would come from the other direction. The player's not like, oh, this is a table, so I'm going to, but it would come from the other direction, at least initially. I mean, that's just a crazy idea. I've never tried this shit. What am I even talking about? It's just, if you want to mechanize things, I believe that is possible. And we're also in the very luxurious situation where we've all played with like wonderful DMs. And I've played with Greg, and Greg is a very permitting DM. If you want to try something, I strongly believe if you want to try something, Greg will definitely encourage it, right? He'll be like, sure, tell me how it works. If it's entire bullshit, of course, that's a no. But that is a luxury. Not every DM is like that. There are lots of DMs who tell you no a lot, right? And it's always great to put the pressure on the player and be like, oh, well, your player needs to be more creative, right? If you've been told no 50 times, oh, fuck that shit. I'm tired of this. I'm just tired. So
I do find it I kind of agree with Faye, but to go back to what Greg is saying, I kind of find it odd that you're taking like you're not so keen on this idea of just the player being creative when Jaromir, like Neal alluded to before, went outside of the bounds of the spells that he was given in probably the most creative way that I've seen any player do, and it resulted in some of the most interesting things in the campaign. So like you yourself embodied like how great that can be and how much it can add to the game.
I'm not saying to not do that. I'm a big believer in role playing and combat. Some people see the game as like a split, right? Like you play your role playing game, and then dice at the table, and now it's time to fight. And I've never kind of believed in that. I've always thought that the role playing game and the combat game are the same game, and you should play it the same way. And I consider spellcasting to be kind of that portion of it. I think that you should be free to role play and do that. But I find it unsatisfying of an answer to say that's how to be more interesting, because not everyone is.
I do agree with that. Yeah.
Not everyone is as. Not everyone's the same role player. I'm not saying that I'm a great role player, right?
No, I'm saying that.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. But not everyone wants to engage role playing the same way, right? I know a friend of mine I met at Ancient Wonders, and he is that's the local game shop I used to play at until it closed in Tualatin. And he is an avid D&D player, and he's actually a very good role player once you get to know him, but you wouldn't notice it right away because he approaches role playing without flowery detail, right? And he doesn't often do the like big description of what his character does. He has a dry sense of humor and a quick wit. And he describes an action that he takes, right? Like, my character does this, my character does this, my character says this. And a lot of people see that and are like, well, that's not good role playing, but it is just what he's comfortable with. And as you play with him, you start realizing that like he's very in character in the actions that he's taking. He's showing you his character more than he's describing it. And I come from a school of word vomit. I spew it all out there and somebody makes pictures out of it. And I think that combat can be more interesting when you role play in it, and it's something that I do a lot, but I think it can't be the only way to make combat more interesting, because some people, like my friend, approach the game from a different angle, right? And so telling somebody, well, just play the game more like I do, doesn't feel satisfying to me.
Okay. Yeah, but I think it's also not a one-size-fits-all, like, I will create this optimal system that will encourage people to take these more interesting combat options. I think that will, whatever system you create will speak to some people, but probably not to others. I think it's, I don't know. I think everyone should just chill out and be flexible and like come up with the creative ideas all the time. Just play like Greg, you guys. Just everyone play like Greg.
Okay. First off, I think there's, I see a lot of people suggest that like being really flowery with how you describe things on your character is role playing. I think it's important that like one of the ways that I see role playing is the act of making like hard decisions as a character, right? Like you are faced with the decision, what does your character do? It doesn't matter how detailed your description of what your character does is. The fact that you made that decision is role playing, and good role playing is the act of being consistent with your character's motives and ideals. Like when people are being really flowery with their language, that's acting. And if you value acting at your table, that's fine. But like I do see a lot of people suggest that like the guy who is very laconic in how they describe their actions as being a bad role player, and that frustrates me because a lot of those people are actually very good role players. They will make solid decisions for the characters they've made. Yes, you brought that up and it just frustrated me because I do see that a lot, Greg, and it drives me nuts.
Well, let's start to take. I
just feel like you could. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish the idea.
I just feel like you can support play without creating subsystems, right? Like I think supporting play mechanically is important. It's a tenet of the way I view role-playing games. And so I think it's interesting to think of ways to try to support people to do things you want them to do with the rules.
I was gonna say we should begin to wrap this up and take it in for a landing. So
are you sure? I have like 18 more topics.
Well, this was very successful. We got through one topic in like an hour and a half. It was great. Let's save the rest for our next time. And is there any final words that we should add to this topic? But if we're going to be wrapping it up soon, anyone want to get any last things in?
I'd just like to say
all day thing.
All day thing? No, I was gonna close it out.
Counter did say all day at one point.
I'd like to say that, Greg, I'm not against what you're saying. I mean, me personally, I just can't. I can't think of a way to mechanically support it other than the ways that has been tried in like 5e or 3e or 4e. I'm with you that like something like that would be cool. I don't think you're wrong, but I quite like the way Neal runs it, where it's like you kind of just come up with it and see if it works. I appreciate that it's not always like I'm running a game now for like my friends that aren't never role played before, and the first sort of 10 sessions have been basically like, I swing my sword, I'm not doing anything. But then in our last session, I was copying an encounter that Neal did with the hangman tree, and somebody was about to get killed by the hangman tree, and he used entangle to like stop himself falling into the tree by like making the vines grow around him to stop him falling in. And everyone was like really excited about that, and that was like the first time any of them had done anything that wasn't just I'm
so
gonna cast
adorable.
this spell. Yeah, and it was like, but I think that if you give them that freedom, some players aren't maybe comfortable with it at first, but eventually people will sort of push against the rules and come up with creative things that they want to do.
I guess the other side of giving mechanical support is showing that you have options.
Yeah.
It's great to say you can do anything you want. And some people can take that and run with it, and they can come up with the most wild, interesting things. There's so many creative, amazing people who are part of the hobby, and like you can see them in shows and things. And I always go, oh my God, I wish I was half as creative as them. And that's not necessarily true to the play experience of everyone, though. And sometimes it's just nice to know that, hey, I have this option, right? Like throwing things in combat is like essential to combat, right? When people went to war, was the first thing that happened in any skirmish. You chucked a bunch of rocks at them. You threw dirt clods, you threw hammers and darts and things, and you just tried to, well, it served two purposes, right? It broke ranks, right? It broke discipline down, and it intimidated and got people fucked up, right? And so when I play a fighter in a future campaign, right, one of the things I did in my Hardcore Heroes audition, which I don't think any of you should watch. I was a nervous wreck and had never been on camera before. It is bad. Don't listen to Faye. She's just being mean to me. But in that, I got into like a little skirmish with a guard, and Neal let me kind of like lead him down to a lake to try to fight. And the first thing I did was like scoop up some dirt and chuck it in his eyes, right? And like, I don't know if that gave me any mechanical advantage. I don't remember. But that is an option that players have with no support right now, right? But
have you not read Combat Tactics? There's a proficiency you can take to fight dirty and throw dirt in people's eyes.
And how many times have people said, Combat and Tactics, the book that ruined AD&D, right?
Every week.
And so my point is, I don't need Combat and Tactics to give me a feat for every little thing, but sometimes it's nice to know as a new player, oh, what if I just took a hammer and hucked it at this dude? That's an option I can have. And if there's a little bit of support for different options like that, I think it will liven up the combat.
Yeah.
Then we can agree on that.
I do like the idea of having broad systems that you can dangle lots of things off of, right? Like you have a broad category of actions. God damn, I sound like a Powered by the Apocalypse fan every time I do this.
I'm telling you, dude, I think you doth protest too much with the Power Fire Apocalypse.
But yeah, no, that's why I do like having broad categories of actions that you can fit, like, this is what I'm going for, and you have like a rough idea of how that's going to look when it's applied. Like, you don't need a tool for everything, but you having like a nice
a nice table.
Yeah, a nice comfy table. Also, Greg brought up auditions. I strongly recommend going and looking at mine. Don't watch it, but go to the comments. Because there's a guy who wrote, this guy has an annoying looking face and most of all hair. And I'd really appreciate everybody would just upvote
Why
that
do you
guy.
think there's no cameras on ChitChat?
I'm going to it right now. It's one of my favorite comments.
It's a hilarious comment.
I wonder if he still watched that guy.
No.
If he's in chat, he should make himself known.
Yeah. So I appreciate Greg's vision, but until you've made your RPG, which I will definitely buy, I think our best option is to just have DMs like Neal that are creative and open-minded and let us
just
kick
pay
sand.
Neal.
Let us use pocket sand. Yeah.
Yep.
Just hire Neal for all your campaigns.
Yeah.
Or any of these other fantastic people.
Or cancel your campaign so that we can play with them.
Any of these things will do.
The replies are quite good as well. I'm not sure if I want to punch it or corrupt it.
Oh God.
What a shallow, dumb comment. I highly doubt you look any better. Oh, well said.
Corrupted.
Sanguine Valentine? Really?
Oh, geez. Okay,
So
Neal,
edgy.
do we have another like bit of time?
Yeah, whatever. I mean, there's no real ending for this.
Well, you were trying to wrap up, but I did.
Well, I have to go and cook, so maybe I might take a step out. So I think Fran is going to kill me if I take too much longer.
Can you take your Wi-Fi headphones downstairs and?
I have a specific D&D question that I would love some feedback on.
Okay.
I'm creating a sandbox to play kind of a West Marches style 5e game. One of the things I wanted to do was mess around with the resting rules. And I have a kind of, I have an idea to make the gritty realism rules essentially, but twist them so that I really emphasize hit dice, which I think are a fascinating mechanic that I really wish more people used. Mm-hmm. So this is my proposed theorem. I would love to get some feedback from y'all.
Okay.
So short rest, 10 minutes. You require, in order to do a short rest, time. That is to yourself, right? You're not running from anything. You're not hiding from anything. Like you are free to set up like a small camp, eat some rations, tend to your wounds. Mm-hmm. In a short rest, you regain anything that the book, any class ability in the book that says it's recovered in a short action, in a short rest, you get those class abilities back, and you are allowed to spend any number of hit dice equal to half your hit dice total or less in order to recover HP. You regain 0 hit dice, you only expend them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty typical short rest.
Yeah, it's not the same essentially as the current.
Basically, yep. Basically, I'm not changing very much about these rules. I'm just tweaking them. The big change is you'll see, because I've added a third stage of resting. Then I get a what I'll call a medium rest. This is your classic 8-hour rest. Mm-hmm. In the 8-hour rest, you are allowed to expend any number of hit dice to regain HP. But you don't get any HP back other than what you spend on your hit dice. Okay. At the conclusion, not at the beginning, but at the conclusion of the long rest, you regain half of your class's allotted hit dice back. So if you expend all of them throughout the day, at the end of 8 hours, you'll get half of them back. You also recover any class abilities that state long rest on them.
This is for the medium rest, right?
This is for the medium 8-hour rest. For the long rest, you have to be a week of safety, which could be back in town, or you need to like have a week stay at some safe place that you found in the wilderness. And with a week's rest, you regain all health, and you regain all levels of exhaustion, and you regain all class abilities, and you would recover from basically like permanent wounds, right? It would be the magic 5e rest, but it's a week, and you have to like seek out the safe place for a week.
Okay, you gain like spells and everything back from the medium rest, right?
Correct.
Okay.
What's the advantage of the
like
long
it.
rest then? What do you get back on a week
You
long
recover
rest that you don't get on?
exhaustion, disease, and permanent injury.
Do you get? You said you get half your hit dice back from a long rest,
half your hit dice back
or from a
long
medium rest.
Yes, from the traditional 8-hour rest.
Okay, I like this idea. I'd say I don't know if I give that many hit dice back.
Yeah, I'd maybe reduce it to a quarter or something.
I would say just give them 1 hit die back every day. That would be my go-to, but that's me specifically. I do worry that half is going to make this change not as significant from
Because
a long
it
rest.
seems like unless you have a disease or exhaustion, you're just 2 days. Is
Greg will disease and exhaust you.
Oh,
I know.
Experience. My goal with this system is that I want people to slowly bleed in the wilds and have an ability to recover some amount to keep going and keep exploring, and not punish them too much for their class abilities. I want them to be able to use them. They have that class for a reason. But I want their ability to safely recover to be... I kind of anticipate that a long rest, a true week-long rest, will be like off screen. It'll be the end of a session. I return back to our town, and now we finally get the long rest. And the point of the medium rest is going to be that like you are recovering hit dice and your abilities, right? You need to do it, but it's not the recovery. You're not gaining your full HP back. Right, you're not regaining necessarily your exhaustion levels. You're not gaining your curatives of whatever might be ailing you. You're still in the like thick of it. You're still in the wilds, and it's dangerous, and you're not safe. And so the reason I give the true week one as an option is like maybe my players are creative and can find a way to do it, and it makes sense in the session. But really, it's the like,
reset between
reward for resetting and going back to town. It's like you can only truly recover if you go back to town.
I would say, I like this system. I think it's a good change. I would just say, like, I think getting half your hit dice back is too much healing if you're trying to make them slowly bleed out on those resources.
Yeah. Because don't forget, if you've got a cleric with cure spells, you probably still are recovering all your HP every day.
That's true. Yeah. Force them to burn more healing on that, like make them either give up spell slots or like have to go with less than max HP.
I don't like getting spells back quite so quickly. You blow all your load of all your things and you get all your HP and all your spells back and everything every night. You just run away for a little bit, go hide in the woods.
Will you
bunker
get your
down.
HP back right away? I'm hoping
you can spend
that with
half
my
your
change...
hit dice. For most people, that'll be most of their HP. You'd have to be really badly wounded for that not to be most of your HP. And if you have any healing, which is wildly available, then you'll be able to get it back.
Especially
fighters
if you
get
spell slots
second wins. Yeah.
Well, I think getting spells back is good, especially because like if you're cutting the short rest down to 10 minutes, fighters are going to be using their short rest abilities all the damn time, right? Like the party's going to spend 10 minutes searching the room, and the fighter's going to be like, I'm gonna take another breather.
And
right?
like warlocks get spells back on short rest, right?
Yeah, like
I think keeping short rest an hour is maybe still the way to go.
I like the 10-minute short rest. I'm gonna thumbs up that myself.
Okay.
Yeah,
I have experimented with a 10-minute short rest before, and what I've found is when I call it an hour, players look at it and go, "Why would I spend an hour when I can spend 8?" Right? Like I'm not going to set up safety for a full hour. But if I can get them in the frame of mind of like, we just disengage for a little bit, we catch our breath, we eat something, we tape something up, and then we get back into it. The narrative of that like is more I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but it clicks with players. They actively will seek out 10-minute short rests that I've never had them do with an hour long. When I do hour-long short rests, almost always they end up going for the 8-hour thing or no rest at all.
I play tested it with Greg in Seekers because I think a short rest there was like 15 minutes. It was essentially like one dungeon turn, right? The time to explore a room.
Yeah, I made the short rest in Seekers one dungeon turn. I'm impressed you realized I had dungeon turns.
Maybe you can only do one hit die per short rest rather than half of your hit die. So you might get like 5 or 6 HP back if you wait 10 minutes, or you could wait like an hour and take.
And then you could stack them, right? You could be like, you could wait 30 minutes to spend 3 hit die.
But I mean, like, if you spend all your hit die right away,
I like that. That's pretty clever.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's better.
So if you spend them all, you're out, right? Until you take an 8-hour and you only get half back.
Yeah.
The short.
Anyway, guys, I really am gonna have to go, but you guys carry on without. You guys carry on without me. It's been good.
Thanks for being here, Nick. It's good to see you, Nick.
See you all.
Hi, Nick.
Bye.
I like the take if you want to heal more, rest longer approach.
Yeah,
I think that's a smart idea.
What about limiting spell slots? So like if you take a 8-hour rest or whatever you're calling it, if instead of getting all of your spell slots back, you get some of them back.
I could do that.
So like per 8 hour, you get like some limited. I don't know.
One of the things I've found,
one per spell level back or
whether
something like
it's
that.
true or not, about the gritty realism rules, is that players who play casters or classes that have a lot of abilities tied to long rests feel very negatively towards they feel like they're not getting them back enough. They feel punished by the fact that they need to long rest.
These people are idiots that don't know what they're talking about.
They need to play some other editions or something and realize that
it's not even that. It's because it's a number of encounters per rest that is the real function here, and they see it's a day of resting, and they don't understand that it's encounters per rest, not like days per rest.
But I think the issue is the classes are balanced around the base rules and not really around the gritty realism. So like some classes don't care. Like a fighter, a warlock doesn't really give a shit if you get a short rest
wizards
or a long
get
rest.
screwed over.
So it seems to disproportionately affect the spellcasting classes.
Yeah, I don't like the you have to rest a week, or I like getting spells back from the normal like 8-hour rest, because that's how the game is balanced, and you're gonna break the class balance in 5e if you try to get rid of it.
And there's nothing wrong with the imbalanced classes, but if you design it as such, like if you make them different but not equal. But if you suddenly take classes that are balanced and then change some superficial detail without really thinking about it.
In a system that is not designed to do that, right? That's the problem.
Yeah.
Like 5e gives you the feeling that it is not balanced. People will say, "Oh, 5e is so well." It's more balanced than other things. It's not perfectly balanced by far, but a system that gives you the feeling that you should have balance in combat, and that is not like I'm rewarding other classes outside of combat with like thieving abilities and yada yada, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you start taking combat viability away from people without giving them anything else for it. Like that feels punishing to a lot of people.
Yeah, wow, I completely forgot what I was gonna say.
I think that the class abilities coming back is the least impactful part of the rest.
Yes.
For the pacing and fun of 5e games. I think that the part of the rest that starts making dungeon masters and some players feel like, it's so easy and it's not giving me the realism I want, is that all of the bad things that happen to them kind of just disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to my goal in creating the system was to create something that made them feel unsafe, right? That felt like they were in danger, they're in the wilds, and that they would continue to have things like exhaustion, things like disease and hit points like at a premium, but their abilities to like solve problems to be relatively free to be at their disposal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with you on this. I
think
like
these-
the system you made. My one big critique is I do think getting half your hit dice back on one medium rest is probably going to be more healing than you want.
What if you do every half hour you get to spend a hit die and you get one spell slot back for those that get spell slots back on long rest or whatever. And then if that time is spent unconscious, like actually sleeping, then it's double. So you can like spend 2 hit dice if you sleep for half an hour, or like if you sleep for 8 hours, you can spend up to 16 hit dice at once. Or something like that. And that way you have a variable time. So people, like, you don't do short and long necessarily. You do this unit of rest gives you this unit of recovery. And then if you want to like take a long rest, then you just rest for a long period of time. And then you have a more flexible.
That's an
We need
interesting
to
way
go
to do
chill
it.
for
So
half an hour. We need to go
instead
chill
of
for 3
introducing
hours.
another tier, just make it granular. Just make it, this is how long it takes to spend a hit die. This is how long it takes to recover a spell slot.
And then you
Mhm.
decide what of those
then
things
you-
you want.
Yeah.
I
And then if
do
you have
worry-
multiple class abilities that recharge on a long
the
rest,
problem
maybe
there
those
is when
come
you've got
back
a-
at like. Go ahead.
Yeah, the problem is if you have a party. Like the thing about the reason that a short rest is a fixed length is so it's not like we're not waiting for the wizard to recover their spells. I've already got my hit dice back. Let's keep moving.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
but that's the fun
also-
part of the RP, I think. You can have the person be
Yeah.
like, "Wizard, are you fucking? You need another 5 hours? We don't have time, Wizard. Come on, let's go."
Well,
I think that could be a fun RP moment.
My bigger issue is that granularity kind of defeats the purpose of what they were going for with some of these systems in 5e. Like the short less long rest dichotomy was meant to be a simple way to approach it, right? And
Well,
I
we're
don't
talking-
think adding,
We're talking about making it more complicated.
but like adding like making it a long rest, a medium rest, like you could even call it a long rest still, and then have the full rest for the thing that Greg was talking about, the week long rest. And then you're not really making it more complicated because the full rest is you're basically slightly nerfing the long rest and then making the full rest the reset button, which people already do anyways in a lot of cases. Like I've played a lot of systems before that have like you get this much HP back per day, and then people will be like, yeah, we're gonna wait for like 2 weeks, are we good? And it's like, yeah, you're good, we'll just say you get everything back, all your healing is back from this 2 weeks of rest. Like people do this anyways. It's just formalizing a thing that has already been done in other game systems because you already have the sleeping bag of healing.
And I kind of do want to encourage a like reset point
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to encourage the style of play that keeps people out in the wilds for like ever and ever and ever.
Yep.
Right. I don't want to see somebody leave the safety of town and go out to the Rotting Oaks and adventure in the Rotting Oaks and like go to a in it
Morning
and
Woods.
then like get the treasure and then go, oh hey, you know what we found in there? This points us over like to the Golden Hills right next door. Now let's go over there and then we're going to find the dwarf fortress that's there, and then we're gonna go past the Golden Hills and we're gonna go into the next, like I don't want this like perpetual adventuring cycle. I want it to be we went to the Rotting Oaks. Holy shit, there was so much bad things there. We almost had diphtheria. The druid was vomiting everywhere. We were so tired. We finally got to the sunken forest or the sunken castle. We like fought our way down it. It was hell. This guy died. Then we grabbed the treasure map and some gold and we're back in town, and oh my god, we need to hit the reset button, right? So I like having the reset button as a like the big things that add up over time need to be reset eventually, right? If you get to 3 or 4 exhaustion levels, like your time to be out adventuring is basically done. And it gives parties a reason to come back to town other than like, hey, I'm running a sandbox. Every session's going to start in town. You have to be back there. It's just meta.
Yeah, I think it's all fine. Like it doesn't sound like you've broken anything. You just kind of added extra options. Like you took the baseline of what's already there, and so
that's the way I start
think
most things, is to just kind of make small changes.
I
So do you
think
think
it's
a
really smart
quarter
small
of hit dice? I'm intrigued by the difference between like. You'd think the half hit dice in the 8-hour rest is too much.
Yep.
So would a quarter do it? Or am I thinking
I
too
think I was saying
small?
like either 1 or 0, but that depends on what you're going for, really. So you want them to want to go back to town eventually because of the disease and exhaustion, right? And then health is just to like not,
or just like maybe they are really unlucky and they just are flat out of hit dice. You know?
Yeah.
But,
so my thinking there, you could probably give them back like 1 hit die to make sure that they're not like completely starved for healing after a while. But like, I worry. I guess it's the kind of thing where I'd have to make a spreadsheet and see like what is the average HP people are getting back relative to their maximum every night of rest if you give them back this many hit dice. But like, I do worry that giving back half of somebody's hit dice for every short rest, you've essentially cut long rest healing in half on average at that point, right?
Yeah, kind of.
And I get the impression you want it to be a little bit more extreme than that. Like, I feel like hit dice, one of the big issues of them in 5e is that they feel like a not important to track resource because they recover so quickly. And I think that if you made it so that you only get like 1 hit die back every time you rest, suddenly you're thinking, okay, I can spend 1 hit die per day. But if I'm spending any more than that, I'm in the red, and I need to carefully condition like how many am I going to spend on a given day. But that's just me. I don't know. It depends on how much healing you want. So I would do some spreadsheets if you really want to figure that out.
Also depends if you allow people to take average or if you just let them roll all the time.
Yep.
Well, with that, I say let's.
I guess the difference. Oh yeah.
I was going to just bring it in for
Neal
landing. But if you have any
needs
final
lunch.
thing,
Nothing important. I was just saying the difference between a quarter of your hit die and 1 hit die isn't that much if you're depending on your level, right? So like,
yes,
it's going to be 1 hit die until you hit level 4, and then it's until you hit level 5.
Okay,
maybe.
yeah, I can see that.
And then even half, it's like, yeah.
I like giving the
It depends what level the characters
fraction because then it can stay consistent,
Scales.
right? If I
That's
say
fair.
half, then it's half always. And when you're low level, you get 1 or 2, and when you're high level, you get 10. If we say a quarter, right, it's the same principle. We've just shifted the curve down.
I think a quarter would give you 2 by what, level 8?
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems fine to me. Just one quarter. That makes assuming we're rounding down, right? Because that's
I
the
am
standard
a
for 5e.
big believer in rounding down, and I got told off by many a DM that that's not how you do it.
those people are dumb.
They're objectively wrong because that's what 5e says.
Yep.
I'd say do one quarter. That
Okay.
I think that's a good point, that you would actually take longer to heal at higher levels if you don't do it as a fraction.
If we do a 1 quarter rounded down, that means you get 1 hit die back at level 6 and 7.
Yep.
You could round up if they do 4 day, like if they somehow do a 4-day rest, you could give them all their hit die back. Like if they can do sequential healing, right? You could do like if they do 2 nights in a row, they get half their hit die back.
My hope is that each adventuring day is going to cost resources, right? It would be a failure in my game design goals if a party could go out, get like expend a bunch of resources and then rest and then rest and then rest type of thing, right? Like I would have failed to bring the experience I'm looking for if that was the case.
But if you like sled calculations, then Greg's next campaign is definitely going to be for you.
I don't want sled calculations. No.
You're saying that, but you're also saying I want limited resources and I want them to be able to carry these things. You know, like it starts like
we're talking
talking
limited
about
intrinsic resources.
I'm talking about
right?
the
limited
class
spell
abilities,
slots,
resources,
limited
right?
hit dice.
Limited exhaustion, and you're gonna be getting leprosy every other adventure, and
every second day.
Every second day leprosy. You've heard it here.
You got to make sure to hit the reset button and go back to town before your pinky falls off. Like,
I was thinking more like, I don't know, scurvy and diphtheria and the things you get from being exposed to the wilderness, and also like you just are eating tacky bread and dried meats forever.
Yeah.
All right then.
Sounds lovely. I'm down.
Okay.
This one for a landing, Neal.
Yes, let's bring it in for a landing here.
Well, I appreciate the feedback though. Thank you.
Well, thank you for providing
sometimes-
us with productive conversation and topics, Greg. This has been our
Yeah.
first peaceful chit chat in years. It feels like months.
Productive chit chat.
Productive chit chat, yes.
I think the only controversial topics we brought up were before the mics went live.
In the pre-show.
Nobody
the
might
ultra
ever
pre-show?
know.
How is gritty realism not a not a?
I love gritty realism. It's good stuff. It's good
All
stuff.
Cool. Does anyone have anything they want to say or announce before we head out? Any words that need to be shared?
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for
Sophie,
listening.
for joining us.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you for all these things. And
Thank you for having me.
know where to find us, and you'll find us soon for things. So goodbye.
Tune into the
Bye-bye.
things. Bye bye.
Bye.